Okay, welcome everybody. Shall we make a start? I'm aware that we've got a couple of members that may join us at some point. Yeah. Where's Henry? Henry's not here either. Okay, well, we'll make a start. Hopefully they'll be able to join us later. So welcome to everybody. Thank you to the officers for attending today and to members. We also have Superintendent Mark. Superintendent, yep. What's your surname, sorry? Runacres, who is here for the paper on serious youth violence. So I'm going to swap it around and take it as our second paper because very busy officer that needs to get back out onto doing whatever it is that busy officers do in the evenings at this time. We are not expecting any fire alarms, so if it does go off, it's real, and we will need to vacate the building. So we go out the front door that we came in, and then we gather down outside the cathedral if that does go off. We are also the first committee to be going back out live streamed. So tonight's being videoed, going out live streaming because that system's now back up and running. So that's really positive. So that's just so that everybody knows that, really. And therefore, can we go around and we'll introduce ourselves? Jo, do you want to start?
Hello, I'm Jo Holmes and I'm a Policy Committee Coordinator supporting this committee.
Hi, I'm Katja Hansjen, I'm Councillor for Brislington East, Labour Councillor.
Hi, it's Sarah Classic, Councillor for Hengrove and Whitchurch Park. I'm Lib Dem Councillor.
Hello, Ellie Freeman, the Green Councillor for Bedminster.
Cam Hayward, Green Councillor for Knoll.
Shona Gemfrey, Green Councillor for Lawrence Hill.
Henry Mashallah, Conservative Councillor for Stoke Bishop.
Sneakily eating my lunch. Councillor Bales, Hartcliffe and Withywood.
Hi, Hannah Gillett, Senior Commissioning Manager for Children and Education Services.
Hello, my name is Amanda Braund. I'm the Service Manager for Fostering, Kinships and Children's Home Services in Bristol.
Hi, I'm Carrie Yates. I'm Head of Strategic Safeguarding and Quality Assurance for Children's Social Care.
Mark Runacres, the Bristol Police Commander.
Good evening, my name is Tara Parsons. I'm Head of Service for Children's Safeguarding and Targeted Services.
Good evening, I'm Graham Wilkie, Policy and Improvement Manager.
Robert Harris, the Project Manager with portfolios, programmes and projects.
And Hannah Woodhouse, Executive Director, Children's Services and Education. Thank you.
And we have some other Democratic Services officers behind us helping us with the technology. So I need to ask the committee members whether they have any declarations of interests for any of the items that we're covering today on the agenda. Okay, that's a no. Thank you. And so item 4 are the minutes of the last meeting. Has anybody got any corrections or questions that they wish to raise about the content of the meeting, the minutes rather? Can we record those as an accurate record then?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Agenda item number 5 are the Chair's announcements. So since we last met, we've had the national budget and we've also had various announcements coming out from our central government. The ones that are specifically kind of related to this area, we've seen 3.2 billion within the pledge coming down for education within that 1 billion for SEND. We are yet to hear the allocation for Bristol, or whether there will be any conditions of grant attached to that. My understanding is that all of the funding for the whole of all local authorities will be with us on the 19th of December. That's the latest date that we are aware of. It's a bit late. Usually we see the education funding come much, much earlier, but obviously the change of government and has led to some delays in that. So 19th of December is when we expect to hear both the DSG and sort of the general fund and the HRA in general. We've also heard of a £6 million investment or additional investment in youth services. So we will be expecting a share of that for Bristol. We don't yet know what that might be. But on the 19th, we will obviously hear some more about that. And there's been some announcements around profit capping within the area of care for children, whether that be for children in care placements or special educational needs. Very welcome. We wait to see how that sort of plays out. And I'm looking at my committee members, particularly the Labour ones, to see if there's any others that they've heard that I've not covered.
There's a consultation going out on the curriculum because we know that the curriculum is not conducive for either SEND children or for mental health, so they're doing a review on the curriculum, and I think there'll be more focus on the arts, so it'll be design, technology, art, music, and that kind of thing. Did I leave one of the arts out? I'm sure I did. Sorry if I did. And what was the other? And Ofsted inspections are going to change from being a one-word answer to a more multi-thing approach. And I think that's come in light of the suicide of one of the primary school teachers who was downgraded in Ofsted, sadly.
Okay, thank you. And that takes us to item number 6, which is public forum. And I'm delighted to say that today we've got some public forum because in our previous meeting we didn't have any. And I'm looking up... I can't see Shaban, so he's not. All of the questions and the answers have been published within the public forum documents on the website, and I encourage those watching now or in the future to read those. Question number 2 is from Catherine Stevens on EHCP needs assessment data. Okay, so unfortunately, Catherine's not with us either. So the answer again and the questions are published within the public forum and are on the website. Question number 4 is from Catherine Lee Smith, and it says not attending here. And that was a question around a specialist school provision. And a 4th question also from Carolyn Lee Smith about SEN caseworker caseloads. Both the answers again on those questions are on the public website, so they can be read by anyone who wishes to understand what it is that's been asked and what the answers were for those, which moves us on to public forum statements. And Kate Persuade, who I know is the head teacher at Elmfield Secondary. So your public statement, Kate, has been published. So it's up to you really, whether you want to highlight things for committee and officers or whether there's things that you wish to add. This is your opportunity to speak now to us.
Lovely, thank you very much. Thank you for listening. This is Adam, who's my Chair of Governors, who's come along as well. So as you can see from our statement, Elmfield School is in a bit of a difficult situation. We are a very specialist school, so we provide education in British Sign Language and in spoken English. There are very few of us across the UK, and our provision is vital for the deaf community. We have a primary school and a secondary school, so that means I provide education for children from 3 to 16 years of age. Our secondary school is in a shocking situation in that the council has not been able to find us suitable premises. So we are split now between 2 sites. I have half my secondary school in a primary school setting, which is not ideal. And we really are looking to the council to work with us for when an alternative provision is found. We need to be in by September next year because I can't open if I don't have a new building. We are working with the council. We hopefully have a site in mind that would work for us, but the timeframes are incredibly tight. I don't know when proposals will come to yourselves, but Adam and I are here just to ask you to make sure that when it comes, you really think about the worth of any investment that you might be able to give to us to open the provision. Deaf education is a very expensive business to provide, but we're worth every single penny to those kids. To give you an idea of one of my typical classrooms, so I'll have a teacher who's a qualified teacher for the deaf, so that means they've done a master's qualification after their teaching. If they're a deaf teacher, and I have many deaf teachers in my school, they have a translator in the classroom with them. So they will teach in sign language. The translator will use spoken English. My pupils, half of them will use sign language, half of them will use spoken voice. And so we have support staff who work in both languages to allow that to happen. It's the only way that deaf children have an equitable access to a full national curriculum. And we offer them a full national curriculum taught by specialist teachers with specialist exams like any child should expect from their secondary school, but within our provision. Is there any questions that anyone would like to ask me? Because I could talk for hours.
Have any members wish to raise any questions? Okay, so Elmfield, go on then.
Sorry, just can you remind us how many children attend the school?
Yes, so we have 55 children on roll currently. Our numbers are we can go up to 76. So with deaf education, you shouldn't really have more than 6 children in any 1 year group. So children have to sit in a horseshoe shape so they can see each other for signing and see the teacher. So our numbers are small, so it's a big investment for a small number of young people, but their life choices change immeasurably by having education.
So we have had, well, I've had, and I know senior officers have had some discussions and some meetings with Elmfield, and there is a site that is kind of earmarked, and I know that the lead officer is in discussions, and I'm also aware that those who run Elmfield are also, know that it's not just the 2 players involved, because the diocese of Bristol, whether that be the Church of England or the Catholic Diocese, own buildings and land in various capacities, and that what the site that we have in mind is a school that was relatively recently closed, and because it was within it was a diocese school, there is this other element in play. Have you got anything have you got any updates at all that can be said in public, Hannah? On this,
I mean,
you need to.
So just to say thank you for raising it, and I know that I mean I just want to recognise that it is urgent, and it is essential, and it is a priority. I know that we're looking at sites, a number of sites at the moment, including this week.
Yeah, we saw another site as well that could also be potentially fit our needs.
So I think what you're saying about the capital priority will be, has been heard. And so I wanted to give you every assurance that we're doing everything we can to move it as quickly as we possibly can, and to unblock sites where we're working with partners, as you say, for provision, but particularly special educational needs provision. So that is a piece of work across the council, and we're really recognising that this year, you have really pushed out the boundaries of what you can do in order to try and facilitate support for Year 7 in particular. So thank you for that.
Thank you for your time.
And we will continue to communicate with you, but thank you for coming in today.
Thank you, Councillor.
And then we have a second public forum statement on Bristol School Forum educational psychologists from Dan Ackroyd.
Yeah, so regarding the educational psychologists, it's got to be a terrible situation for both officers and parents when this council has more vacancies than positions filled. But yeah, regarding Schools Forum, I believe it is in the public interest for those meetings to be webcast where possible. Also, I'm quite disappointed that the last meeting was not webcast. It is a public meeting. I went along to record it for the benefit of other people, and it was quite disgraceful that officers were telling me that it was not lawful to record it. I'd like to remind councillors and officers that when they give instructions to members of the public, they are part of the state. There is a threat of force being used against them if they disobey instructions from people in the state, which is not really an acceptable situation. So I really hope you can communicate with the chair of the schools forum and persuade him that a lot of people are interested in the meetings. They are public meetings, and members should not be too surprised when those meetings are recorded and broadcast. Thank you.
Okay, so I will respond in relation to the school forum because I was there last night, and Hannah's going to update, has got some news on the educational psychologists, because it was an area that when it was brought to my attention, I asked exactly the same questions. I agree that school forum is a public meeting, is in statutory legislation. I have today taken up what happened last night, and the problem with that is that then becomes the thing that people are talking about, as opposed to some of the other things that happened in school forum that actually is more indicative of what's going on in Bristol. I won't name them what they are, but if you're interested in what my view is, I'll let you know, Dan. But the idea that a public meeting is somehow different because it's school forum as opposed to another type of public meeting is fantasy in my view, and I will be following up.
And just to say that we have just finished a recruitment round for EPs, and we've made several offers. So very, very conscious of the need to continue to recruit into the EP service and actually the SEND service as well.
So the thing I want to add about education psychologists, this goes for occupational therapists and other sort of specialists that every local authority needs. That the courses that universities offer are prescribed in number by the government, basically, and this has been an issue for a number of years. I know that my predecessor on People's Scrutiny, Councillor Kent, raised this because the numbers of university ed psych courses in the city don't match anywhere near the number of people we need sort of coming through the pipeline, and that is something that the One City Children and Young People's Board is going to focus on. We've got a focus for workforce, children's workforce this coming year, and I will be speaking with university representatives as to why those numbers are low and what they can do, or therefore what we can do, in order to try to increase the numbers of places that are offered for those who wish to train to be educational psychologists. There's a shortage in Bristol, there's a shortage at a national level. So it's not just us, and I'm sure there's many other local authorities that are also saying we need more university courses so that we can get the workforce that is required for our next generation. Okay, thank you. Any other members wish to comment on any of those two things? Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
About the number of caseworkers, because at People's Scrutiny, you'll probably remember, there was a time where we didn't have enough and we were promised, I think, an extra 20. So how are we with that? Have we recruited any more caseworkers?
Hannah, are you able to comment on the number of caseworkers?
So I can't tell you how many more we have, but I mean, it was part of my update in a minute, actually. It's, we are out to consultation across the SEND service at the moment, which closes tomorrow. So we're in discussion with the service, which is about changing the way that they work in terms of processing so that we can speed up assessments and continue to do that well. We have expanded the service, so we have invested more funding into the service, which will increase the number of posts, which will bring the case loads down. But I can't tell you right now, because we're in consultation, by how many. Happy to provide an update if that's helpful at the next committee.
And ultimately, everyone needs an ed psych to have that, to have the full assessment. And I know that it's the ed psych service that we need to sort of focus on equally as much as the SEND caseworkers.
The private sector is about an 8-month waiting list at the moment. So if parents can't get a local authority ed psych assessment and they feel the need to go private, lots and lots of them are being told it's 8 months.
That actually sounds longer than it is in Bristol, doesn't it?
So it's a long wait, whichever route you choose.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's the end of public forum. Thank you very much. Please feel free to stay if you wish. So we're going to move on to our first paper, which is our update from Children and Young People's, the whole area, which this committee covers. And I'm going to hand over to Hannah to talk us through that paper. Thank you.
Thank you. And as ever, this is work in progress as an update report. So if there are items that councillors or anyone would like us to report on, we can bring that forward into this report. So it's a bit of a catch-all across children's and education services. I want to say thank you to the team for the data which is in it. We are producing much more data more regularly than we have before. And so again, if there's too much or too little, or you'd like a sort of deep dive into that, we can do that. I'll try not to go through it in too much detail. I just want to pick out some things really, including things that are on the agenda today. So first of all, since we met last time, as you said, we've had a number of policy announcements. We talked about a few of them already. We did have 1 billion uplift in funding for SEND. We're waiting to see how much of that is going to realise itself in Bristol. We also have had funding for capital investment in schools. We've got a 1-year extension to the family hub funding, which is really exciting in Bristol. And there have also been some more recent announcements since this paper was written about social care, taking forward proposals within the Josh McAllister review, which looks at multi-agency arrangements, speaks very much to the safeguarding paper that's on the agenda, strengthening particularly the role of education in safeguarding, as well as extending corporate parenting duties to children with a social worker who are not necessarily in care. So that's quite an expansion for the role for the virtual school. And again, in Bristol, that's definitely one of the sort of big priorities that we want to focus on. So policy changes continue to come through, and at the same time, we're setting, as part of the rest of the council, our budget, and we have a paper on the agenda which I can speak to briefly about our transformation programme, which is about how do we set a budget that recognises the level of need that we have, but also the work that we need to do around prevention and early intervention in particular. We have been doing some work across our staff in terms of children's and education, so that we have a single plan, because there's a tendency, I think, to have a sort of children's services, social care driven plan and then an education driven plan, and of course we are interdependent, so we're trying to do some work internally around what are our priorities as a whole service, so that we can build that understanding as a service, and very happy to bring that when it's completed for information. But you can see here there's a particular focus in that work around educational outcomes for disadvantaged pupils, particularly around prevention and early intervention, vulnerable children, and the edge of care, stability and family help, and outcomes obviously for children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities. We've also been consulting across a number of services in the last month. We are consulting in the SEND services, as I've talked about. We're also consulting widely across the area of social care services, around changing the way that we deliver social care, with a focus on locality working, with a focus on adolescents and a focus on the edge of care work. And again, we can bring further updates when that consultation process is finished. The consultations are always unsettling for staff, so that has been a difficult time, and it's always in the interest of improving outcomes and retaining quality staff that we do that. We've also done some consultations around education welfare officers, increasing the number of education welfare officers, as well as school improvement. So it's been a big consultation period in the last month. We have looked in our QIP board, our improvement board, at private fostering arrangements. We've looked at attendance, and we have looked at the timeliness of EHCPs, and I'll speak to that now, because I know it is something that this committee and in general across Bristol we're concerned about. So in the performance paper, in the data, it sets out the number of new requests for EHCPs, number of children awaiting EHCPs, as well as the timeliness data in there as well. And we've had obviously published a question and answer around the number of children awaiting EHCPs, so the data sits there as well. It is fair to say that this continues to be a really significant challenge for all of us. And again, I just wanted to sort of recognise the distress and the concern from families, from parents, and from children with special educational needs while they're waiting for statutory assessment. It is a statutory assessment, it's not a target, and we do recognise that. And so we are working to communicate really well with parents and carers through the Parent Carer Forum, and really grateful for their support in this work. In terms of the 20-week timeliness, we have we are at 12% of EHCP's plans finalised in 20 weeks as of now. Obviously our year-to-date is higher than that, but that's where we are now. But however, we have finalised more EHCPs this month than we had previously. So whilst the timeliness of the 20 weeks is dropping, we are finalising more, and that's because we are, as we talked last time, we're finalising more who have gone beyond the 20 weeks. What we're looking at is those legacy outliers, I guess, that have taken longer, and what we're wanting to do is to make sure that no one goes beyond certainly 52 weeks, and trying to bring down the longer waiting EHCPs, whilst also recognising that 20 weeks is a statutory expectation. I can talk more about the process for doing that, but I just wanted to sort of refer back to the restructure of the SEND service, because there have been a number of commitments made to increase our staff, recognising the scale of demand that has hit that service. We've had a 30% rise in requests over the last year, children coming forward at the EHCPs, and that will put pressure on the service if you've got the same number of people, which is why we're expanding the service, and obviously that will take time to work through as we continue to focus on it. It's worth saying that we continue to see a low number of tribunals against the national average, and overall our decision making hasn't changed. And I know that was a subject of concern. We've finalised 640 HCP plans this year, and we've had 1,300 to date into the service this year. So we can talk more about EHCPs if it's helpful, and I know it'll be a topic that we'll continue to come back to. It's worth saying that we've got the SEND strategy, which we talked about last time, coming back in January to this committee, so we can talk about the strategy, the timeliness, as well as the funding challenges underneath that at the committee in January. Other things on the data, just to point out to you, but happy to take any questions. We've got the number of children missing education is set out here at 658, and I know Christine has asked us to look hard at that group of children and understand why, where they are missing education, what are the blockages and barriers that are preventing them being able to access education. So we'll be doing a deep dive into that data. We've talked here before about attendance. We're seeing the attendance rates hold up, but it's still early in the year. But we are seeing where we're higher than we were at this stage of last year across primary, secondary and special, although secondary and special are starting to drop, and we're certainly seeing some schools dropping further faster. So we need to continue to look at that data. We get live attendance data on a daily basis, so it's really helpful to be able to do that. And that gives me the opportunity of saying we've got an attendance conference, which is being led by trusts and schools together in the city. We've got 100 schools attending. It's here. It's on Tuesday morning next door to recommit schools and trusts to working together to improve attendance. So that continues to remain a priority, and I know it's also a priority of this committee, and we'll be working on a working group to look at attendance. Number of children in care has risen slightly. The number of children subject to a child protection plan has fallen slightly. And I think those were the things I was going to pull out of the data. The only other things just to say from the report then were that we have been doing some work just in the education area. We've been doing some work on school improvement framework. So the 38 maintained schools remaining. Sorry. 38 schools, maintained schools, which we are very proud to remain within the local authority control in Bristol. We've been working closely with them to implement a new school improvement framework across the 38. We've talked here before about Key Stage 2 data. Primary data is not strong across Bristol. We've got some brilliant primary schools, but we've also got some schools that are really struggling. And so we've implemented a framework with school improvement officers. It's difficult to recruit school improvement officers anywhere. And so that has been work that we want to make sure that we get quality advice to those maintained schools. So that's been a subject of focus for us this term. We've also seen the phonics data coming through, which, like Key Primary, has shown that the rate of improvement has been slower than national. We hope to get secondary data by January, I think. So we can bring that here then too. Exclusions. So what we've put in this report for the first time is the exclusions data. We're happy to continue to report on live exclusions data across the city, and happy to bring more information forward, because I know it's a subject that has concerned many. I think the headline, as the report says, is that whilst we have seen exclusions rising across Bristol the last 5 years, we've actually seen this year's significant numbers of managed moves dropping, which means that what we did have in Bristol was we had children moving between secondary schools without a formal exclusion, which means that you don't have to legally talk to parents. You are moving children between schools without that sort of transparency. So we're seeing managed moves, market movement dropping really significantly, whilst exclusions at the moment are lower than quite significantly lower than the same time last year. But it is a subject of concern to secondary schools, to us all, particularly for those children, to make sure that those children at risk of exclusion are supported to remain in those schools. And I think, again, it'll be something that we'll come back to. Primary school pan reduction. So we have got too many primary places going forward in the city. That's, again, I've talked about this before. We're not an outlier in that. We have a national demographic drop. We have asked all primary schools and across the city to consider removing a form of entry voluntarily from their school, and we'd be particularly focusing on the bigger schools. So we've got a number of 3-form entry, 4-form entry primary schools. We have asked them if they could consider bringing down their pan so that what we don't have is all primary schools with not enough pupils in them, which means they can't pay sufficient staff. It means financially they're very stretched. So it's better that we have a strategic approach to reduction of pan across Bristol. It's fair to say, again, that's work in progress. So we have had a number of schools saying, actually, yes, it makes sense for us to reduce the number of children in our school, but we're still going to have too many places, I'm sure, in September 2026 at the moment, and therefore we need to continue to work with particularly the academies as well as our own schools to deliver that. So that's an ongoing challenge for us. I think just the last couple of things to note on the social care side. There's information in here about our work across the front door. Practice week, which is always a positive experience for social workers considering practice. We had a number of inputs this year from Islington and from Newham. And we have been working on placements of children in care. We continue to do that. I'll talk about that in the transformation paper. We've got on the agenda care experience as a local protected characteristic, so we'll be talking about that. The Foster Carers Association had a brilliant pantomime, which I put in the paper. So do support that as it comes around each year. It was fantastic. We had a Youth Justice Service pilot inspection, which we have been working on the outcomes of that. We will be working with the Youth Justice Board and with the police and with others to be able to bring a focus around the areas that we need to improve as a result of the Youth Justice inspection, as well as the areas that were strong. And the last thing to say is that we will be looking at building on the belonging strategy for children and young people, which, as you know, is our Bristol city-wide children and young people strategy. It finishes in 2024, so we are looking to write the new belonging strategy from next year with a very strong focus on young people's voice. So that will be a participation piece of work which will bring forward the strategy probably by the middle of the year next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm looking at my committee members to right, so I can write down. So Shona, okay, Kerry, Annie. Okay, Shona, off you go.
Cool. I've got quite a few, sorry. But thank you very much for all the work, and I know how hard the staff work on all this. So first question about the phonics screening checks. Do we have a plan for how to continue to improve that, or is that something we are able to do, or is it how much can we try and push that to improve further, because it is something that as you note, more significantly affects children from vulnerable backgrounds anyway.
So yeah, it's very much will feature as part of our school improvement framework. So it's part of the underlying data that, well, I mean, first of all, the governing body will be using, and the head teacher will be using to identify the improvement needs in the school, and then our school improvement officers will be supporting them to access the right support to improve phonics if that's a concern for the school. I think it is always a good litmus test. I think the phonics performance in any school is always a really good indicator, and there are a number of approaches on the market which can improve phonics across the school if they're implemented well. So yes, that will be it is a focus for the school improvement team.
Thank you. Next question. So I can see that the numbers of children on a child protection plan have been slowly creeping up over the last year and a half, but that we're statistically lower than our neighbours. How do we compare to other core cities? Do we know?
I don't have that information, she says, looking quickly at my colleagues. We can find out. Right answer, thank you.
Thank you. I think that's probably a more useful comparison for us. Third question, in terms of I think this is probably just me wanting to clarify the wording, but in the graph about the short-term home placement stability, that's at 8%, but it means that 8% of the children are having that level of instability rather than 8% are feeling really stable? Is that, it's on page 10, I think.
Yeah. So what that, I'm just wondering whether I might come to Graham, so he'll explain it better.
Yeah, sure. So that's a measure of short-term placement stability. So the lower the better. The lower the figure, the better. So those are the children that have had more than 3 placements in that time period. So we want to keep that to a minimum.
Great. But then the next, just to clarify, because I think I got confused, because the next line down is the long-term placement stability is 66%, but that is positive. We want that to be high, don't we?
If it's helpful, for the next one, I can put a polarity for these measures, which might because it isn't always obvious.
Cool, thank you. And final question, sorry, I'm almost done. This might not be something we have any data on, but I was just curious because I know particularly for children in care or children open to the disabled teams, having that continuous relationship with the same worker is really helpful. And I wondered if we had any data about the stability of worker relationship or how much families are having to change worker.
There has been a previous measure around stability of work that we shared and that was benchmarked with the Children's Commissioner. I believe that's going to be released by the Department for Education in the data release next year, but it's something that we have been trying to track internally as well, so we can bring something back on that in more detail. It might be better to do that when we have the nationally benchmark information, which would be able to give a bit of relative performance to that as well.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Graham.
And Councillor Bales?
I think you mentioned, where's it gone? I think you said missing from education, but did you mean the 701 electively home educated children, 35 of which have an EHCP? Do we have the data ward by ward, and is it linked to things like deprivation?
So the question was about EHE. So the children missing education. We will do it. We are looking at so elective home education. Question is, do we have that data by ward, and is it linked to deprivation? I mean, it's worth saying on this, we are below. So we are below the national average, and it is dropping. There's a proportion of parents who've elected to educate their children at home, and as you can see, a small number of those children have an EHCP, although some others may be waiting in our service, obviously. So I would imagine that we probably do have that data, and we can provide it.
Yeah, we should have that data by where the children live. So yeah, that should be available. We can make it available. We'd have to think about the suppression of some of that information in terms of if the numbers of children are very low, so we wouldn't want to identify individual children, but I'm sure we could present in a way that makes sense.
You can use like circles or something, can't you? And so you have really tiny circles in wards where there's small numbers, and then bigger circles or something in wards where the numbers are bigger, something like some relative. Would that be if it's too?
Just to see whether it's proportionate across the city, because obviously we know that in my ward the amount of children and young people that go to university is very low, whereas in Clifton it's 100%. So is it linked to deprivation? Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, I think we probably know the answer to that. I wanted to come back actually. So, children missing education are children that we as an authority are aware of, but they're not on roll with any school. And this number did really fire out to me. So my question was, what do we know about it? Why are they not going through the fair access protocol panels? Because that would be your usual route that the education welfare officer or whoever would take. It would be passed through the fair access panel, and therefore the child will get allocated a place. So I suppose it's about what is it that's stopping those children going through that panel, because it's a really high number. Have you got any idea how that might compare to other authorities? I mean, have you got any idea about that?
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. So the question is, how do we know how many children missing education, how we compare to other authorities? I don't.
I'm not sure we have benchmarked information on that, but I can try and find out. I know we have electively home educated sort of benchmark rates, but children missing education, I'll find out.
Yeah. So the elective home education have actively said, this is how I'm going to educate my child, whereas a child that's missing education is not in that, they're just not getting an education at all. So I think we bring something back here that says this is what we discovered when we looked at over 600 children that aren't getting any kind of education as far as we're aware. There is another category called pupils missing education. Those children have a school role, but they're not attending. So that would be down to those schools to be the first line of kind of pick-up and support, because those schools that those children are on roll with would be responsible, whereas with children missing education, it falls to the local authority. And Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. Just had a couple of questions around my favourite subject, EHCPs. And just two things, I think, just to check really. So it's great that obviously overall those waiting times are coming down. Is that because you're taking a slightly different approach of triaging as plans come in so that it's more manageable rather than really trying to aim for that kind of blanket 20-week target? So you sort of change your strategy slightly, which appears to be working. Is that?
So the service have, we do try to treat every child in the order in which they come in, because that, you know, it's difficult to identify different reasons why we would move other people further up. But the service, I think, have been focused on the longer waiting assessments, which is why they're completing more quicker. But it's also why potentially the waiting time is coming down. The timeliness is coming down for 20 weeks, because we're looking, as we said last time, we're looking at 30, 40 weeks. We're looking at those that have been in the system for longer, wanting to deliver on those first. So we have shifted our approach very, very clearly towards that group of young people. And again, you know, continuing to communicate with parents who are at all stages of that process as quickly as we can.
Thank you. Yeah, and you talk about the recovery plan and how you want to bring it back, I think somewhere. I've made a note, but I can't remember where it was mentioned. Just wondered whether you had a sense of where you think we might be in kind of 1 year, 5 years time. Do you feel like that's within reach, or just too many unknowns at this point?
I wouldn't want to say. I also think it would be helpful to do that with the service lead. So we can talk about the recovery plan in more detail when we bring the SEND strategy. It also depends, I think, on the sort of level of need and the number of children coming through with that level of need. And obviously, there's a big impetus as well on our specialist placements and the realisation of those through the capital programme as well.
I'm sorry, that just sparked a thought. Do you think that some of this sort of hump that we've had and the increase that we've had is a result of COVID and might slowly tail off as those impacts kind of settle out? Or do you think it's a kind of continuing trend that we as a country, city, might just continue to see more children with more needs coming through?
I mean, certainly it's a national trend. So I think, I mean, again, as we've said before, I think it'll be a combination of a lot of different things. And we are seeing assessments being brought forward at very, very early stages, and certainly an increased number of needs of very younger children. But we're also seeing first-time assessments coming into the secondary system as well. So it's really difficult to and I wouldn't want to sort of hypothesize about why that pressure is coming. One of the things we talked about before is one of the reasons why we're seeing in Bristol more EHCP assessments is, we think, linked to the removal of top-up funding, which we consulted on 2 years ago, which we're taking out of the system. We are seeing a number of those children present for an EHCP, whereas previously they would have had non-statutory top-up funding. So I think we've got a national pressure or rise in need of children, but in Bristol we've also got the removal of top-up, which has driven further pressure on the system.
Just to make one more point, not a question, just that I attended the SEND event and really, I thought it was really valuable, and I know that other people that were there found it really good as well, and we got to talk to lots of different services, some of whom I've had contact with, so it was nice to sort of see some faces, but also I think there was that sense of people being able to sort of network and connect up and talk about the different things that they were doing that overlapped and connected. So it was a really positive event, and I hope we can see more of that kind of thing.
And can I just say, I think one of the big areas of focus is around mainstream schools, and how can we encourage all mainstream schools to continue to include and support all children that can remain in mainstream for as long as possible. And I just wanted to say, again, I've spent the day today with schools and trusts across Bristol. It is their top priority, and so it feels like we are all trying to do the same thing together, but I think the partnership work that we saw in October, we need to continue to do that, particularly with the schools as well. Thanks.
Katja?
I just wanted a little question. I was wondering about the number of children waiting specialist provision. Do you know what percentage of, or how many children there are in specialist specialist provision in Bristol?
In special schools,
Yeah,
in specialist
special
places
provision,
in
yeah.
particular, I can find that info.
I was just
we
wondering what
obviously
the
have that.
percentage was of how many are awaiting it and how many are already in it, if that makes sense.
Yes, I can provide that information.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from members on this paper? No? Okay.
I think Graham might have your answer.
Oh, right, we got an answer. Well, that was quick.
Just on the question around electively home-educated children by ward, just sort of, we can share a link, but there's a publicly available ward profile tool. Within that, we actually have rates of children with electively home-educated, so you can compare ward by ward. So I'd recommend that as a tool. It's interesting to understand different types of indicator for children across and the variations across wards. So that's included within there alongside some other things that might be of interest as well.
Can you send that out? You send that out to members and is it so? Is it publicly available?
Yeah, it's through our website, but I think we just need to do more to advertise it. So we'll share it.
Put a link on the committee page or something, or add it to the minutes and stuff. Yeah, because I'm sure that there might be others that might want to have a play around on it and see what else, including myself. I think have a look at that. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on. So this is going to be the agenda item that's been moved forward. So Tara, are you introducing this one? So this is the paper that's entitled Serious Youth Violence, although I think I'd prefer to call it Serious Violence Affecting Our Youth, maybe. But if you'd like to introduce it, and also the officer is with us to support. Thanks.
Yep, sure, no problem. So I'm just going to take you through the paper and summarise it, and then if you've got any questions for Mark, myself, or Carrie in front afterwards, that would be great. Okay, so the paper's an update on our strategic and operational response to serious youth violence and extrafamilial harm, and our coordinated response from community safety and children and education. As we're aware, there have been a number of serious significant incidents this year, and we've also seen an increase in the number of referrals to children's services in relation to extrafamilial harm and exploitation. This is also the case in similar cities across England. The increase is due to recent events, but also due to an increase in awareness of extrafamilial harm and exploitation being seen as a safeguarding concern, the impact on children and families of the cost of living and poverty. Our strategic response to extrafamilial harm and serious youth violence is one of collaboration across the city. We've worked together and learnt from previous incidents and strengthened our incident response processes. This has been joint work with the neighbourhood police team, Bristol community and public health teams, and children's services and education. The Preventing Serious Youth Violence Board has been established to provide improved oversight with key partners and support joined up work towards strategic goals. It takes a one city approach, many communities approach, and works to end cycles of serious violence. Ensure synergy with delivery of services so that we can maximise our joint work and our intervention with children and families across the city. We then have our proactive intervention with children's services that support children and families with a variety of interventions. Safer Options specifically reaches out across all levels of needs and delivers a comprehensive programme of support. Extrafamilial harm, as already discussed, is now recognised more clearly as a safeguarding issue. Over the last year, we've identified some developments that are needed to expand on the good work that Safer Options and our statutory and early help teams do already. This work is in progress and will be implemented with our multi-agency colleagues, our Youth Justice Service, Education, and will be a centralised service closely linked with our multi-agency safeguarding hub. The paper also references our Youth Justice Service and our turnaround programme. We're waiting grant funding clarification for this and for our Safer Options, some of our Safer Options resource. However, we're also working on contingency plans should we not get the grants. To summarise, we've had done a lot of developments strategically and operationally over the last 9 months. And the proposal is that we return in March with an update progress report on all the developments and how they've been taken forward and embedded. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Obviously, this is a particularly pertinent area of work for us, where it is cross-agency, led by the statutory areas within our city, both obviously within the Bristol boundaries, but wherever it is that it goes beyond where it would be appropriate for that to also work outside of the Bristol boundary, because people don't stay within geographic boundaries when it comes to their activities, be those within this area or any other. So it's quite it's a wide area of work that's been going on that involves a lot of the statutory agencies, and the impact of this community sort of violence that are affecting our young people. Some of us that were at the Youth Council a couple of weeks ago, we heard from our young people there's a very high level of fear and insecurity that they're feeling when they're out in their communities. Some of them even are talking about feeling fearful when they're walking to school. So it's certainly something that all of us, but also it's everybody's kind of business really, to try to help our young people feel safe when they're out and about. I'm looking to see if any of my committee members have got any questions or comments that they wish to bring forward. So if we start with Shona, Harry, yeah, okay. I'll write it down and then I'll come back to you if we start.
Thank you. This is some of the knife incidents happened in my ward of Lawrence Hill, so it feels particularly pertinent. I wanted to ask about the return home interviews that are currently done by Bernardo's. If I remember correctly, there's a time frame when those are meant to happen within, and I wondered if we had any data on what percentage are happening within the time frame. I think it's 48 hours out of memory, that is meant to happen once they return home.
So we do have data on that. Off the top of my head, I can't get it, but we can definitely share that. And we're doing some work with the organisation that we have a strategic partnership with, Bernardo's Base, to look at how we can kind of keep improving that. So we're really on top of it, and making sure that we are getting as good a performance around that as we can. We know it's not quite where we want it to be at the moment, and partly that is because young people are telling us that we have deliberately employed an independent organisation to do that, and we need to have independence in completing those return home interviews, but young people are often saying they don't want to speak to a stranger, so we're just kind of thinking about how we can come up with a plan that fulfills our kind of obligations but also makes young people feel comfortable.
Sorry, follow-up question. Do they have to be done by an independent? I'm sure that I've seen and heard of return home interviews being done by a worker who's already involved with the young person. Has that changed in the last few years?
So we have a strategic partnership with an independent provider specifically to give that independence. Previously, we did have known workers completing those return home interviews, and take-up wasn't particularly good, and there were some concerns about kind of independence and young people being able to say what they thought and the reasons. Hence, we've gone for an independent provider, and now we're looking at how we can kind of try and balance and make sure we're not missing opportunities to either get the return home interviews completed, or actually more often record that those conversations have happened, because they are happening with a known and trusted worker, and making sure that we're recording that. So that's the work we're doing at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And Henry, you were next.
Oh, thank you. I noticed on page 40 the pressures and risks and the percentage change per calendar year, especially for serious youth violence from 94 to 141. Obviously that's a huge, quite a big jump, and I know you don't have the data for 2024, but do you expect the number to be even higher for this calendar year, with everything that's been going on?
I don't think it would be like as big a jump as it has been, but I haven't got the data right now as to where we are at the moment, but I can absolutely get that for you.
Yeah, that'd be really good. And just one other question: what do you sort of attribute for such a large jump? I know it's quite a difficult question to answer, but is there sort of like something that sort of stands out as being sort of a main contributor?
Yeah, so I can probably come in here. So after the incidents in East Bristol, we did a lot of work to fully review what the data showed across the city. There had been a significant increase in serious youth violence and knife crime incidents in East Bristol in the recent months leading up to the early part of this year. In the other areas in South Bristol and North and Central, it's fairly static. Some of the issues that were playing out in East Bristol were relating to ongoing tensions, which we had information and intelligence about, and of the incidents that are listed here, the two incidents, the McDonald's incident and Rawnsley Park, we know that there were links between those incidents in terms of the evidence that was heard in court about how tensions were playing out between some young people who were involved in street conflict. Since the targeted work was delivered, including the early intervention work, there were reductions, particularly in East Bristol, and the other areas have remained fairly static, and those reductions have been maintained as we've moved further through the year. It's not something we're complacent about, though. The issue around identity and what that means to young people in different parts of the city is key. That's quite a challenging issue for us to police our way through, because it links into a lot of the issues around deprivation, vulnerability and exploitation. But that just highlights to me the importance of the early intervention work through safer options to identify young people who are at a heightened level of risk. So we spoke about non-attendance at school. We know that through the work in the Youth Justice Board, it's a figure that we review regularly around the sort of push and pull factors, that all the protective factors that exist for young people, and school attendance, education, training and family stability are really, really key. So where that doesn't exist, we're able to identify young people who are therefore exposed to a higher level of vulnerability, and there are some links into exploitation from adults who are seeking to exploit those young people and that vulnerability and draw them into wider criminality, some of which involves drug dealing, and often the carriage of knives will then become part of those behaviours to perceive protection for the young people. But going back to your initial question, that significant increase was primarily around East Bristol, and it was linked to ongoing tensions, which tragically then played out to some extent in the offences that we saw.
Thank you, that was really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Sarah, did you want to?
Thank you. I wanted to ask, the report obviously covers a lot of sort of the multi-agency structure, and it's really great that we've got so many sort of partners and agencies involved with this. One thing I just wanted to clarify, with so many sort of partners and agencies and people being very involved with this, are we confident in the sort of overarching structure that things aren't, that there's a sort of somebody at the top of the chain who's got oversight of everything, and we don't see areas kind of slipping between the cracks, and potentially because this group covers this sort of area, but this group kind of covers this area, and actually there's like a little slither gap in the middle where they don't quite cover the same thing. And are we confident that we're not missing anything in that multi-agency approach?
I mean, I think it's a really good question, and it's the piece of work that we're doing through the Preventing Violence Board, is to get really clear strategically on the priorities that we have as a city and who is responsible for which. And so we have been doing that work over the last few months with a view to making sure of that, because we've got a lot of voice, a lot of engagement, as you say, lots of partnerships, lots of willingness to support and anxiety about wanting to contribute. And we are making sure that we're really, really clear in terms of responsibilities between ourselves, between the public health responsibilities, with the police responsibilities, those of the voluntary sector and others. But the duties are quite clear in terms of the legal duties, as the Director of Children's Services they're quite clear, as are those on other statutory partners. So yes, that's the work that we're doing, and we can continue to update on as we do it.
And Susan. Anyone else indicate? Okay.
Yeah, my question is really about, because we're looking at it with like a two-pronged approach of response to something that happens and how we prevent something that happens. And I'm thinking about the funding for services that can be used for preventative activities and stuff. And I don't know, because obviously the police are obviously involved usually with the after effects, but how much are the police involved in the prevention? And whether we get funding from the, what's her name?
PCC?
Yeah, that one.
The police, yeah.
Whether we get funding from that and where that funding might go in preventative work with the police. In my area, in where I work with youth that are from Hartcliffe and Witherwood. So obviously the thing that happened with the young lads over at Knowle was actually quite significant for some of my youth. Some of them come from Knowle, some of them come from Hartcliffe. They mix quite well in the classroom, but obviously they became quite afraid of reactions to that and whether they would be able to come from Knowle into Hartcliffe to actually still come to college. But we actually get local community community officers, PCSOs that come in and do prevention work. So they do workshops, including things like knife crime and how to prevent it and stuff. And we've also done bleed kit training and things like that. But how much of that funding comes from? Where does it kind of come from to ensure that is able to continue and maybe be more accessible to youth groups, to other youth provision in terms of the prevention work rather than the reactive work?
No, it's absolutely key. I couldn't agree with you more. And I mean, the only thing I disagree with that you said is around our role around being reactive. So the policing role should be absolutely proactive, and we need to be operating in that space where we're engaging with communities. That's always been a real focus of mine. That's what neighbourhood and community policing is about. We need to be connected, engaged with communities. We need to be active in that space. We need to be identifying and supporting funding opportunities and applications where we can. That's what we do. There's Police and Crime Commission funding which is available and can be applied for. There's various other pots of money which can be accessed. My officers should be, and I hope that they are, engaged with communities in the way that you say. There's lots of good work that has been done across South Bristol. Youth Moves, Young Bristol, the Robbins Foundation are three that I normally name as kind of headline groups that I know we're actively involved with, but lots of others, work that we're doing around the community garden in Knowle currently, and some activities for Christmas that we're really, really keen to support, because where you've got that engagement and that connection into communities, that builds confidence in policing. It makes people more likely to report things to us, which enables us to deliver those interventions where we need to deal with those people who need enforcement interventions. But the preventative work is really, really key. So, I mean, I would like to take the opportunity to acknowledge and pay tribute to the communities from Lawrence Hill, Easton, Knowle and Hartcliffe. I thought that the responses that were shown and that were received by the police investigations in all those parts of the city and beyond were absolutely exemplary. It really supported us in getting the evidence that we needed to get the positive outcomes at court. I don't think that happened by chance, though. I think that's reflected of fairly well engaged and connected communities. We need to build on that further. There are opportunities to do that. The groups that we brought together as statutory agencies but linking into communities in response to the incidents were really, really well attended, so we can make sure we were sharing information about what was going on. How that linked into schools was really, really key. We had meetings regularly with senior representatives of schools across the city after Max and Mason were murdered. The meetings that we had were attended by over 100 representatives of those schools, which I think is testament to how keen people were to get involved in monitoring the impacts and dealing with those impacts. So we have sort of harnessed those connections now. Tackling serious youth violence and knife crime was one of our community safety priorities already, one of the 7 priorities in our plan. We've now established locality-based delivery groups to make sure that we're delivering work that's tailored to the needs of the local community across the localities. And I'd urge people to get involved in those groups, because we need to deliver work, one city, many communities, in the right way to meet the needs of those communities. So an example being aware of what the identity of being either from Knowle or Hartcliffe means to some people, but to harness that in a positive way so that it highlights the things that we have in common rather than the perceived differences.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that the police officers that actually come in and work with my youth are fantastic.
Good.
The workshops that they offer are really great, and it helps them engage with our young learners as well. Some of them are the learners that you might find at places like Morrison's, you knew what I mean.
Yeah.
And when the police come in and they're known to the kids are like, oh my God, but the police officers put them at their ease and develop a really good relationship over the academic year with the workshops and stuff. So I'm just saying, I just think that it would be really advantageous to get more of that.
Yeah.
Because they really are, I give them 100% for the effort that they put into the work that they do with my youth. So.
As you may be aware, the new Police and Crime Commissioner's priorities have been out for consultation until recently. In the draft plan, neighbourhood policing was the #1 priority for the Police and Crime Commissioner. So I would hope that will be reflected in additional funding and resource to deliver on our commitment to that. Because I believe it's the way that we need to police in the city, because its benefits in a preventative channel are absolutely apparent.
Thank you.
And Kerry, you want to go next?
So it says 663 children received support via multi-agency detached youth work through local partners. I've been a youth worker and I know how difficult and rewarding the job is. So I wanted to ask about what support and training there is for detached youth work, because it really is difficult when you've got like 30 kids in a park and there's only 2 youth workers. And we have to walk home by ourselves after, and that can be quite frightening if you've had a really negative interaction with those young people. And also, I don't know if you remember back in January after Max and Mason was murdered, I sent you quite a few emails because of the lack of information that we received as ward councillors. Even though you knew where the perpetrators were from, we weren't told anything. And I know that's improved now, but how can we continue to receive information so that we're all working together as a multi-agency? So it's not just schools and, detached youth workers or youth centres, that we're involved as well, because I live in that ward. The perpetrators, they lived not far from where I live. That was quite frightening. It was quite frightening for the whole community to not be given any information.
So if I could pick up that one, I can't comment so much on the issue around detached youth work, but absolutely I agree with, and we've seen the benefits, but also I want to highlight the importance of safe spaces for young people as well, to come in, to be able to access equivalent facilities, but in that environment where they can be safe. In the immediate aftermath of the incident, it was a very challenging time for us, because there was a need to balance the requirement for communication into communities, but to be very considered in what we shared. That's because there were many arrests that were made, there were many lines of inquiry. Releasing information ahead of time brings risk for us. It also brings potential compromise to the investigation. So that was, from my point of view, in terms of engagement, neighbourhood, community policing, I want to give as much as I can, but I'm working with a colleague who's the detective superintendent, who's Gary Haskins, who led the investigation, who's really trying to rein in what I want to be sharing with communities. So we have to find a balance. I know that Gary is very aware of the importance of community engagement. He was previously the Chief Inspector in East Bristol, and we worked together extensively then. Previously in policing, I think some of our senior detectives probably haven't understood the benefits of that communication into communities as much as we do now. But in the immediate aftermath of the incident, it's not just around what we want to be able to share, it's what we can or sometimes can't share because of the wider considerations. We knew that every time that we went to an address to make an inquiry, let alone an arrest attempt, we had to risk assess that around what potentially that was going to cause in terms of impacts in the wider community. There was information coming into us which we needed to act upon. There were some arrests that were made that were people who were completely unconnected, but we know that those arrests, because we were having to do so often with quite a highly visible police presence because of the weapons that we use, we had to use armed officers for some of those arrest attempts. That drew attention to locations and some addresses, which then created risk itself, which we needed to manage. So these are all things that fed into how we needed to decide what we could and couldn't share. I hope that as soon as we were able to start sharing information more freely, we did so. And regarding your question around the need to work together, I couldn't agree more. And that's what the locality-based groups need to be delivering. If you haven't had the opportunity to link into those yet, then I'll speak to Steph, the Area Chief Inspector, to make sure that that happens, because the role of councillors, I've always said from the outset, is key in that. You're connected into the communities so well that we need to make you a part of our planning around how do we tackle all the priorities, antisocial behaviour, hate crime, serious youth violence, modern slavery. There's 7 priorities and other things that we need to be dealing with locally, and we need to be doing that with the community and not to the community. So I'll speak to Steph and make sure you're linked into that.
Susan?
I just wanted to follow up on a little bit of that, because you said about making arrests of people who weren't actually involved. And I know of a lad who was actually arrested after the events of Max and Mason. And I think we also need to look at the wider ripple effect, if you like, because obviously that particular young boy was arrested and questioned. And although he was innocent and he wasn't actually charged with anything, and he was released and everything, but the wider impact on that family was actually quite massive, and they ended up having to be moved out of the area, and all the family were relocated, new schools and everything, and the trauma that that family went through. And I just think, when things like this happen, obviously we understand that arrests have to be made because you've got to follow all lines of inquiry, but just for us all to be mindful of that kind of situation that comes out of that, in terms of the impact on families of people who have been arrested that are innocent, and the consequences of that, which is kind of unavoidable, but maybe just to kind of be mindful of, I guess, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, just to reassure you, so when we were making those decisions, we were linked into the partnership with senior colleagues from education and schools to make sure that we were risk assessing. So that went into the Safer Options team, and we were doing full risk assessments around those young people and their families. There were inevitably some consequences which we then had to manage. That's always going to be the case. But please be assured that we weren't just doing that in isolation. That was whenever a suspect was identified, we were working with colleagues to identify the ripple effects, exactly as you say, for that family, for the young people, any other siblings, any other relatives, the schools they were at, and how we could manage those risks to try and mitigate the negative impacts.
Okay, I'm just looking to see whether anyone can comment on Councillor Bell's question about detached youth work training. Oh, right, okay. Thanks, Tara.
I can. I'd just like to say the detached youth workers that supported the families in the community at the time were excellent and amazing. The work that they did was commendable. We've got senior youth workers that also were working with you guys out in the communities in the evenings and during the day. I haven't got the details about the training, but I'd happily pick that up and share that with you just to see if there's anything more that you could be accessing.
I'm just really concerned about the impact of all of that on the workers.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Is there any way who do they offload that kind of, the effect on their own mental health?
Yeah, within Families in Focus and within the teams, there is supervision and support, but I just think it would be good to provide you with that so it gives you the reassurance. Is that right?
Can I just come? So one thing that we identified through the partnership that I referred to earlier was the need to respond to that issue. So then there were a number of sessions that were held initially in South Bristol and then citywide, where we provided an opportunity for professionals working with young people in whichever environment, and that included non-professionals as well, people who wanted some help and support to understand issues around trauma, and how they could identify indicators of trauma in themselves and in the young people they were working with, and then to signpost to them what the avenues and channels were where they could get some support. So I think that's a really good example of how the a wider benefit of the partnership that was brought together, because that was identified in the conversations we were having about the impact on children in schools, for example, and also supporting the professionals that are working with them.
Okay, any more questions or statements that we wish to? No? Okay, so I think that this area comes back to what we are monitoring ourselves, because the biggest protective safeguarding factor, and this I'm putting children in care experience aside here, because that would be safe and secure home for them to live in. But for those children, for the majority of children, the biggest protective safeguarding factor will be attending an education setting, whether that's a mainstream school or an alternative learning provider or anything like that. It comes up time and time and time again that that's an element, and that is widely understood. So the push towards making sure that attendance is atop of everybody's list, and, for example, that 600 odd children that are currently missing education that we're aware of. So this is kind of why it's important to deep dive into this and to see what is going on for those children, because being with adults, learning, progressing, having opportunities is very protective for them, because they're not being manipulated or groomed by those that might wish to put them in situations that will be maybe harmful for them. But it also doesn't become part of their everyday experiences. The experiences they're having are positive, and they're with opportunities, and they're seeing their futures, and they're seeing something they can move into. And it's that early intervention, that early kind of identification for those children with additional needs, we know will keep them wanting to come into school, wanting to learn, and wanting to progress. So it's all linked, but also very, very complex. This will be something that's ongoing. We've got some short-term stuff, but we've got some further long-term work that we'll be doing. So we will come back to this at some point. But I'd like to thank you, Mark, for coming in. I think it was highly appreciated to hear straight from the person in the statutory agency that's leading that with us. Thank you very much. And to officers that have already spoken, if you wish to leave, please do. Don't feel that you need to stay if you need to shoot home, because it is 6:30. Thanks very much. Thank you. So, okay. We have to. Are you all happy to note this report? Yeah. Okay. And the previous one? Yes, on the previous one. Yes. Thank you. Okay. So we're going to carry on with the agenda as set out then. So our next agenda item is number 8. So this is the care experience to be recognised locally as a protected characteristic. And Amanda's going to introduce the paper for us. But just to put it into the context, this is a protected characteristic for us locally, as if it was part of the Equality Act. So we would treat it as if it was an element of the Equality Act. Is that correct?
Yes, and I'll expand on it a little bit.
Fantastic. Over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here to present this report, which is seeking approval that being care experienced can become a locally protected characteristic for Bristol. Young people 18 or over who have previously been in care are known as care experienced young people. Due to the experience of childhood trauma and abuse, these young people have been unable to grow up in their family home. They may have additional vulnerabilities and needs, in addition to that of peers of similar age. Care experienced young people are less likely to access higher education or be in employment. They're more likely to experience mental health issues, homelessness, and engage in criminality than their peers. This means that these young people, who are children of our city, would most benefit from a local decision to adopt being care experienced as a protected characteristic within Bristol City Council, and they are a uniquely placed vulnerable group to benefit from the benefits this decision would be afford. When we describe our care experienced young people as a uniquely placed group, they really are children of our city. As a child in care, you are in care either through an order to Bristol City Council or through a voluntary arrangement, and the council holds parental responsibility. So the council is your parent, and this is why these young people are so uniquely placed. What we are trying to achieve through the adoption of this characteristic is thinking about how we can enhance our corporate parenting responsibilities, which are enshrined in the 2017 Act. There are 7 principles which are set out in the paper that talks about how we can promote and get the very best outcomes for our young people, as we would hope to do for our own children. Some of us here may be parents. The majority of us will have people that we love dearly. What we're trying to do through exercising our corporate parenting responsibility is to really try and make sure that our young people get the same opportunities and reach their own potential as we would hope for our own children. Adopting being carer experienced as a protected characteristic has several benefits to care experienced young people. Firstly, it will mean that their needs are considered through any equality impact assessment that we complete in a council. So any citywide decisions that require an equality impact assessment will directly consider the impact on care experienced young people. Secondly, as an employer, Bristol City Council, one of the biggest employers in the city, it will afford young people who are care experienced the same protections as the other 9 protected characteristics. This could be, for example, a reasonable adjustment or particular considerations around their needs and vulnerabilities, which could really, really help our young people achieve and thrive in the workplace. I also hope it will encourage other employers to think about how they can support care experienced young people to be supported to achieve in the workplace. There's 101 local authorities already who have adopted this as a local protected characteristic. So Bristol would join that cohort of local authorities, which I think is a really good news story for us as a city. And as I say, it really just underpins our commitment to corporate parenting, which is already so strong in Bristol, and would send a really, really clear message to our young people of their value to us, and how that we appreciate that they need this additional support and consideration within our council. Thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So I'm looking at my committee members to see if people have got any questions. Katya, go ahead. Others indicate.
It's not so much of a question as a statement, as I'm really glad that this is happening, because I've long thought about this as a really important thing to happen. Having my experience of working with children in care, and seeing the differences that they have with other children. So to me, that's really, really important, because it can be some very, very small things that to us seem very minor, but when you don't have a family or a parents, which a lot of us take for granted, by the way, it can be quite a disaster for the young person for whatever reasons. I could go through lots of stories, but I won't here. The other thing I wanted to know is how, one of the things I would really like to see is some sort of, I'm not sure how I would phrase this, but it's sort of education or publicity campaign for people to understand why we need this, because I've often come across attitudes that are quite shocking, really, for me, but people just don't understand. They're just the same. What's the difference? Even people that have been in care and might not have been in care in their later life, they might be in care in their earlier life. The trauma that children experience when your whole world of not having who's your mum and who's your dad or whatever it is so traumatic. It's beyond, there's something most children take for granted, and that's just one of the things that you should be able to, but not always possible. So if there's anything that you could do that we could promote that more to teachers and workers and other people, just generally community people, even employers, that this why we need this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are programs ongoing to help our understanding of trauma, which obviously is particularly applicable to young people who are care experienced. So within our service, there are a range of different services, I guess, that we have to try and work with schools or other professionals around our children. Obviously, Bristol City Council are working in terms of being a trauma-informed organisation as well. But yeah, I think the message is improving, but there's always room for more improvement. And I suppose for me, like with the other 9 protected characteristics, it's really true that you can make some minor and reasonable adjustments to support people with different diversity issues really succeed and thrive in the workplace. And that's the same for young people who are care experienced. If we can look through that diversity and inclusion lens, we can make a real difference to them and anybody else who has a protected characteristic.
Shona, go ahead.
Yeah, just to say this is really important. Thank you very much for bringing it, and particularly as children who've been in care often have other vulnerabilities as well, are often from the black and minority ethnic communities are often overrepresented, or children from working class backgrounds are often overrepresented in the care system. I wanted to ask what we will be able to do as a local authority to encourage other employers to take this seriously. As Katya said, a lot of people don't sort of understand that there is this level of discrimination until you start reading the stories of people who have, been passed up for jobs or education because of it. So what can we do to not just make this a nice thing that we say and then don't do anything with? What can we do to push for other employers in the city to take this seriously?
Shall I take that? Yeah. Shall I take? Yeah. My view is that this is something certainly that goes through the One City boards. That I think is where it sits to make, because a lot of those people are they're senior representatives from organisations that are big employers in our city, and the council adopting this is the lead, and sharing our experiences of it and how it's being embedded within our organisation, I think is one of the first steps towards doing that. Some of those are other kind of public sector or third sector, but there are also some private sector organisations that sit on those One City boards. So I think that's the place for us to start. I did have a question around HR and whether, because it isn't in the national legislation, is it something that it can be included in a framework that is very legalese, which employment is, when you're if you're deciding between 2 people, you can then bring in the Equalities Act. So I suppose my question is, can we do that as a council when it's adopted locally, or is that not something? Is it because it's locally adopted we can't do it, or is that a question for HR?
HR have been completely involved in this, and also were kind enough to seek some advice from South Gloss and other HR colleagues that had already adopted this as a local protected characteristic. So they were really, I'm sorry because I'm going to state a really obvious point, but they were really clear that obviously there hasn't been a change in the legislation, but as a council, we are able to adopt it in the significant majority of our HR policies, procedures, equality impact assessments, and as we would treat any of the other 9 protected characteristics. So I believe the answer to your question in terms of recruitment is that yes, it can be used in that way. I'd like to really just specifically check with HR to make sure I'm telling you the right information. But my memory from that conversation is there wasn't anything as a council that we couldn't choose to adopt this characteristic along with the other 9. But if it was in a technical legal setting, it isn't technically legal. Am I making sense? I hope I am.
Yeah.
And check that particular.
Yeah, and that will help, I think, those organisations within that work with the council in the One City arena to have the confidence that they can also adopt those kinds of policies and raise that awareness amongst their own staff. Hannah, did you know?
Well, I think that we have it as a guarantee. We have a guaranteed interview on our recruitment form currently, but I think the implication of this with others beyond us can do that as well. And whether if we were choosing between whether it would prioritise a care experienced person over a non, I think that's the bit that it would be good to clarify. But do we do already do this to some extent within the council already?
I will clarify that specific point, but I do believe that's fine actually, but I will just clarify it and come back to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else? Ellie, thanks.
Is it something that we are communicating with our contractors, or some? You know, can we get the message out that way? Because obviously it's not just us as an employer, but kind of further down the supply chain that we deal with.
Yeah, I think that's a great procurement. Or Vattenfall that we were with last night, all of the, you know, yes, and I suppose it's social value as well, isn't it? It kind of counts in with that element of contracts that the council is, well, it's reasonably forward with that, so it's quite an embedded element.
I think also, I guess how we hope is that we can join this with our other work around corporate parenting, so fostering children care opportunities for care experienced young people, and our aspiration is always how we can galvanise as a city to create better opportunities in terms of our corporate parenting duty. So I would see this very much kind of coming inside that suite of work, but for us to adopt it and to show people it's important to us and it can be done and how it can be done, I think is a brilliant first step.
Okay, and so what I want to do is thank the officers that have worked through the Corporate Parenting Board for quite a long time, it seems, to bring this to our committee. And I also want to make it clear that this is something that was started under the previous administration and that we've brought this through. So I think it's also important for me to state that. So this report now goes to full council. So we move it up to full council, and that then gives us an opportunity to remind everybody at full council that we're all part of the corporate parenting. We all have that responsibility, and we all then can take that new information and our reiterated responsibilities for our corporate parenting back into the other committees that we sit on, so that those groups of young people are at the forefront of our mind when we're discussing with other officers from sort of other arenas or other organisations that are putting projects together or something, so that we can keep reminding and keep this group of really vulnerable children at the front and asking questions about what specifically are you doing for this group. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Note. Are we happy to note? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to agenda item number, if I can find it. It's Hannah, isn't it? Yeah. So agenda item number 11, which is the home to school travel electric vehicle fleet. And Hannah, are you introducing this paper? Thank you.
Yes.
Off you go. Over to yourself.
Thank you. Yes, so we're here seeking approval for the purchase of 29 electric vehicles to create a fleet to be used by Bristol City Council.
Sorry to interrupt, but what's happening with item 9?
Oh, sorry. Have I taken them out of sync?
Okay.
Apologies. Beg your pardon. Sorry. Shall we go back to the agenda as was? I do apologise. It's children and education transformation. Ian's doing that one. Oh, you're doing. Yeah. Okay. Beg your pardon.
No, I was confused because I had a confusion of Hannah's then. Yes. Look, I won't take very long because I'm conscious of time. We haven't brought towards this committee since it's been sitting in this administration an update on our transformation programme. So we wanted to let you know what was happening with our transformation programme. So, and I think the first thing to say is that this work is really massively dependent on the outcome of the budget. So what I won't be doing today is talking to you about the budget position for children and young people, because that is a process that will be done in another place and at the right time and as part of the wider council budget setting process. Our transformation programme is very much part of how we are approaching our budget, however, this year and in the future years. So I just want to give you a bit of a summary of where we are. We had a transformation programme in children's and children's services in particular, which was called Our Families. And it's been focused on the last couple of years, particularly on reducing the pressure, particularly in at the high end of children's social care, particularly through what, you know, supply side measures. So more children's homes, foster carer support in particular, some work particularly around the workforce as well, and which we have implemented. All three of those. We've got, as you know, a number of new new children's homes coming on board, and we've brought those through this committee before. We've also implemented the foster care at the Mockingbird model, which is about providing more support for foster carers as well. So that went well, and continues to be a priority. However, we are not, and you'll see in our finance reports, which come through this committee and elsewhere, we are not able to deliver the full amount of the savings that we committed to. Partly as a result of two things in particular. One was around home to school travel savings, which were not made last year, partly as a result of the delay of the implementation of post-16 travel. And I know that we will be talking about that, as I'm sure in this committee as we go forward. It's a current conversation that we're continuing to have with parents. And then the other area that we didn't implement this year was savings associated with children's centres. We do expect to be able to bring those forward in future years, again dependent on the budget. But we took a diagnostic of our families' work, and whilst we're seeing that we did take some savings, we've continued to see a budget overspend at the same time against high cost residential placements. And again, we've talked about that before. The current budget overspend is 16 million. It is driving the pressure on the council. We are doing everything we can to bring that overspend down. And so we reviewed our transformation programme, and the conclusion was that we need to spend more time on the preventative and early intervention work. So whilst the supply side stuff is fine, we also need to work upstream to make sure children, I mean, I know we've talked about this a lot, to make sure that children from the earlier stages and from the early stages of vulnerability are supported as far as possible to prevent crises occurring, families under pressure, which then causes children to be vulnerable and sometimes be taken into care, and therefore our reliance on high cost placements if we don't have sufficient foster carers. So it's a need to focus on prevention and early intervention. So what you can see here is that we are reviewing our transformation programme. We're going to call it Families First, which is not a massive shift from its original name, but it is going to focus particularly around the 10 to 16 cohort and rising demand and complexity of need. And so it will have, and you can see in the paper, a number of strands, particularly around family help, which links to the government's Stable Homes Built on Love strategy, which was published last year, particularly around a multi-agency child protection system, around the edge of care, including extrafamilial harm, which Tara has talked about today, the potential, how do we support permanence planning so that children who are in care are able to minimise the number of placement moves, which we've talked about, but also to bring them to, as far as possible, either home or to a stable placement, so that there is a degree of permanence for them, and we minimise movement. And what we want to do is to pilot our family hubs model, probably particularly in one area of the city, probably in the south of the city, so that we bring together all our partners who are operating children's centres, schools, family hubs, health partners, police partners, voluntary and community sector, to work together to serve communities at a family hub level, but also on a sort of more hyper-local basis, more locally in the communities, in that way, preventing the need for statutory services. So you will see when we bring our budget proposals forward as a full council, you will see reference to a children's transformation programme which is focused on early intervention prevention, and has these strands within it. There will also be a focus around practice and culture, because obviously, as we know, the more positive and confident, particularly social workers, feel that we are able to minimise pressure, vacancies, agency workers in social care, the better in terms of supporting children at risk. And so we will be focusing there on practice and on recruitment and support for social workers as well as part of that programme. So I think that's really all I wanted to say. I was conscious that we hadn't brought an update. You will see more in the budget proposals when they come through. Thank you.
So I just sort of, as you're talking about the budget, so we are focused very much on Investor Save. There's a recognition that there needs to be some more resource focused on our young people and their families and in their communities. And that is something that will be coming forward within our budget. So I'm just wondering, I'm looking at the committee members to see if they've got any questions or comments for Hannah. Oh, okay. So we are asked to... Oh.
We've got three, but one of them is slightly different. You might want to take the first two and then do the last one separately.
Yeah, okay. So we're asked to note the current position and performance of our Families programme, note and support the direction of travel for Families First described in the report. Are we happy to do those two things? Okay, I've got unanimous nods. And the third one is that we agree to receive the full business case in preparation for approval in January, which is our next committee meet. I've not got nods. Are there people that don't wish to do that? Cam? Okay, right, sorry, I didn't see the thumb. Right, there we go. Okay, so all of those three things have been approved. Thanks. Thank you very much. So now we are moving on, I think, to home to school transport and the electric fleet, and that is for yourself, Hannah. Thank you.
Thanks, and I should also say my colleague Robert Harris is here as well. He's working on the programme. But yes, this is a paper to approve the purchase of 29 electric vehicles to create a fleet to be used by Bristol City Council for home to school travel. So we have a statutory duty to provide eligible children and young people with home to school travel, and numbers that are eligible for this service has been increasing year on year. Children with special educational needs and disabilities make up 94% of all children receiving this support, and they are the most likely to travel furthest to a suitable school and to require a taxi type vehicle to meet their needs. So we currently commission out all of Send Transport through a framework of external contractors. There's over 400 routes in place which have been tendered. We've seen costs increase per mile significantly since 2021, and the top 5 most expensive routes as of September 24 ranged from £70,300 up to £117,000 per school year. So we need to reduce costs in order to secure a sustainable service going forwards, and procuring a partial fleet of electric vehicles will bring significant savings, as well as the following benefits: working towards net zero targets, giving more oversight and control to the service, incentivising cost reductions in the contractor market, potential sponsorship-driven income generation, and offer potential across the council for reducing costs in transport generally. So we're seeking approval for the purchase of those 29 electric vehicles and recruitment of the same number of drivers to allow 29 existing commissioned routes to be replaced over the 2 years, 25-26 and 26-27. The service will recruit a transport manager and drivers, and this cost will be taken from the existing revenue budget, replacing some of the currently commissioned costs. Vehicles will be maintained at Sandy Park using the charging infrastructure that's already available, and we've been assured that that's sufficient for the additional fleet. So the investment required is £1.7 million total and would be repaid over 2 years, and the electric vehicle fleet is projected to deliver a net benefit of £3.8 million over 5 years.
Thank you very much. So, Sarah, and then Ellie, and then Henry, and then Susan. I'd write them down, trying to get in that order. Off you go. Thanks.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. The first one being about our existing contracts for home to school transport. Have we had much engagement with those providing the existing contract, and are we expecting any backlash from them over the fact that there'll be sort of a reduction in the services that we contract from them? Because I am aware there's a lot of taxi drivers that do it, and it's quite a lucrative contract for them, and so they are also paying their wages and self-employed and all those things. So I just want to check that we are sufficiently engaging with our current contractors.
Yeah, thanks. So some engagement has taken place. Rob, I don't know if you have any more details on the extent of that, but I will say it is delivered via a framework arrangement at the moment. So under a framework, there is no commitment to spend. So providers will have been made aware of that at the point of joining the framework. That the levels of spend that we make with them is variable, so they will have been aware of that when joining the contract.
Yes, so the service has a contractor engagement session early next week, I think. So yeah, it's important we do keep a good working relationship with the taxi contractors.
And I've just got a question about the the potential sponsorship driving income generation. Is that am I understanding this right? We're considering adverts on the fleet or something like that? And just a little bit of information, is that entirely appropriate if we're doing home to school transport with children? Just checking that is, an appropriate use of our vehicles.
Yes, that is my understanding that's kind of, it would be, adverts like, we have on roundabouts, you sometimes have adverts, a similar scheme to that. Obviously, any adverts that were placed would need to be checked that they were appropriate for, the cohort of young people who are accessing that. So that would be considered. It's just one kind of avenue that we're exploring at the moment to potentially maximise the income that we can make.
I mean, there is a concern about the amount of advertising that young people are exposed to generally in their day-to-day lives on TV, walking through the centre. So there is a slight concern about. I understand the benefit of income generation for the council, but there is a slight concern there of it being an additional element of advertising in front of our young people, especially those who with additional needs who will be using that service.
Yeah, thank you. We'll take that away and make sure that's considered.
Ellie, I think you were next.
I think somewhere it mentioned about the fleet being used by other services. Obviously, school closes for 6 weeks over the summer. Have you got any sense of where that might be used? It seems like a great sort of asset for the council.
I'm not sure, Rob, do you have any information on that?
Yeah, so the priority at the moment is the homeschool travel, so we'll roll that out to begin with, and then we're recruiting a fleet supervisor, and part of their role will be to investigate use across the council. So obviously we've got respite centres that could be used during the day, social workers going on visits. There's all sorts of different opportunities. I think we spent several $100,000 on local taxis as a council outside of home to school transport, so that is something that we'll look to do.
Henry, I think you were next.
Yes, it's good to see that obviously this has proved that the council can save quite a considerable amount of money over the years that go forward. But obviously with the sort of electric vehicles how they are, the technology is changing all the time. Batteries that were in cars compared to a couple of years ago, it's an ever progressive thing. So again, I have a habit of asking a bit difficult, awkward questions, but what do you expect the lifespan of the fleet to be? Are we talking like how many years roughly? And would you be keeping an eye on the sort of the market of electric vehicles? So for example, if they developed a battery which is smaller and more efficient, would you possibly consider selling the fleet or trading it in for a newer, more efficient fleet of electric cars or electric vehicles?
Yes, so it's definitely something that we're looking at and we need to be aware of. So I think the oldest electric vehicle we've got in the fleet at the moment is about 8 years old, and there's no issues with that. But yeah, it's something that, again, as part of the expansion of the fleet, we need to factor into the programme as sort of a go, no go. So we need to look at what the makeup is, how the existing fleet are performing, and if there's issues, then yeah, we need to look at that. We have factored in potentially selling a number after 5 years, but it's likely we'll carry on and keep them going. But yeah, it's all something that we need to evaluate as we go. But for now, we're not too concerned about range, in that I think we've got a couple of Maxus 9s that we're having converted into passenger vehicles at the moment. Their range on those is about 120 miles. So a lot of these journeys will be short, sharp journeys in and around Bristol. So the range for that will easily cover sort of a week's worth of of range, and even if it does reduce it by sort of 20% over 5 years, that's still it's still enough to get back and around. So, but it's something definitely to keep an eye on.
Brilliant, thank you.
Susan, did you have?
You kind of answered a little bit of one of my questions. So if we're having fleet of vehicles, will we be employing people to drive, and would we have people on the bus supervising the kids coming on and off? One of the biggest issues that I've heard is having children with special educational needs going on, being transported by different people. So would this make it a little bit more safe in terms of how they feel safe by having that maintained service of recognised staff, as well as the bonus of the money side of it, but actually the advantages for the young people who are actually being transported?
Yeah, so but as well as the kind of the 29 vehicles, there'll also be recruitment of 29 drivers. And exactly as you say, we hope that that provides a bit more kind of sustainability in the drive that the young person's having. So there will be escorts on the vehicle as well where children need it. But with any service that's run in-house, you do have an increased level of kind of scrutiny and oversight of that. So we are confident that this will also bring kind of quality elements into that, a bit more of a stable workforce. And additionally, if there is kind of sickness of drivers, the fleet supervisor, part of their role will be to step in so that there will be a pool of regular drivers. They should have the same one every time, but if not, it will be someone stepping in that they should be familiar with. So it's not, lots of different drivers at different times, to make sure that the children are familiar and comfortable with those journeys.
Getcha, go ahead.
I was just wondering, because a lot of our SEN children tend to go out of Bristol or come into Bristol. We just heard from earlier on the Elm School gets children from all around, just not Bristol. And how does this work, or are we only using these for the Bristol transports for now? And if they do go out, or I presume if our children go out, is there some sort of cross payment for it or something?
So I think there's a bit of analysis to be done on which routes are going to be kind of replaced with the Bristol City Council fleet, because we've got about 400 routes, so this is only going to be quite a small proportion initially. So there will be an analysis and an assessment done on where's it best to swap those routes out. Obviously, range of battery, we've kind of got to take into consideration with electric vehicles. So we will be doing an analysis on which routes are best, but if they are not having the electric vehicle fleet, there will still be the exact same arrangements we've got at the moment with commissioned providers. And I would just like to say, with the commissioned providers as well, they are generally high quality, so we're not seeing massive difference in drivers and routes changing all the time. There is scrutiny over those as well, but we just think that this will be a really positive addition to that, both in terms of quality and bringing down costs.
Okay, anybody else? So this is a key decision, so I have to formally read out what it is that we're being asked to approve. So I will do that now. So we are being asked to do three things today. Number one is to approve the home to school transport fleet full business case, which is also an Appendix H. To implement an in-house home-to-school travel fleet using Bristol City Council vehicles and staff. Secondly, authorise the Executive Director for Children and Education, in consultation with the Chair, to take all steps required to procure and award the contracts for the purchase of the vehicles in line with the allotted, they say budget envelope, I hate the expression, with the allotted funds outlined in the report. And thirdly, authorises the Executive Director of Children and Education to take all steps required to extend the scope of use of the fleet beyond home to school transport to deliver savings and benefits to other Bristol City Council departments. So that's the element where it might sit outside, so that we're not just using these vehicles during school pick-up and drop-off, and that they're used outside of those times, and also during the 13 weeks that schools are not sitting. So I'm going to take all three together. We need a visible indication, Joe, because it's a key decision. So it's over $500,000 and it affects, well, pretty much all wards actually. So all of those in favour, can I see raised hands? So that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please feel free to leave as it's getting late. Okay, so moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is number 12, Bristol Sanctuary Services. And we are going to be introduced to this paper by Anne James. Is that on the end? Thank you. Over to yourself.
Hello, everybody. The head of service, Francesca Wickens, gives her apologies. She's sick today, so I'm stepping in. So I'm introducing you today to the Bristol Sanctuary Services. We've renamed ourselves. We used to be the Bristol Refugee Resettlement Team and the Asylum Team, and now we're Sanctuary Services, and we've come together under Children's Services. So prior to September this year, the resettlement team was under Adult Services and the asylum team was under Children's Services, and now we're all come together under Children's Services. So in essence, the Sanctuary Services vision is for Bristol to be a place where sanctuary seekers are welcomed and included, feel safe, live free from poverty, and have their rights and entitlements respected. And for Bristol to be a place where sanctuary seekers can positively rebuild their lives and be given opportunities to develop and share their talents. So that's our aim for all sanctuary seekers. So I was just going to begin by explaining that Bristol's had a refugee and asylum seeker strategy since 2019, but that needs updating. It's going to be updated next year. We're working on that at the moment. We've produced a needs assessment, which was collated by Bristol Public Health Team in collaboration with the voluntary sector for refugees and asylum seekers, and we'll be continuing to work on that, consulting with sanctuary seekers, consulting with the voluntary sector, and we will bring forward for you a draft strategy and action plan in May 2025. So that's going to come back to you in a lot more detail. And the strategy and action plan will be from 2025 to 2030. And then the other area is the refugee resettlement team, and I'm the service manager for that team. So since 2016, we've welcomed around about 900 resettled refugees. And they come from a number of different projects. So there's the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme, and there's the Afghan Relocations and Assistance Policy Scheme. So you may remember August 2021, there was Operation Pitting, and a number of Afghans arrived. And at the time, we supported 666 people in bridging hotels in Bristol, and 464 continued to settle in Bristol. So people live in private rented sector accommodation, and they're offered wraparound support for 3 years by the resettlement team. And we're funded for each person on the resettlement scheme £20,000, so it's fully funded by the Home Office, and it enables us to provide a broader range of services to people outside of the resettlement team as well. So it doesn't cost the general fund, and it brings additional value into the city. We also have the UK Resettlement Scheme. This used to be the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme, which was majority Syrians. So between 2016 and 2021, the government resettled 20,000 Syrians under the scheme and 3,000 vulnerable children. And we resettled in Bristol around about 400 people under that scheme. And that has now become the UK Resettlement Scheme. It's a global scheme, so it's open to people from all over the world. We have Rohingya families from Bangladesh. We have people from Sudan. We have Somalia, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan as well. So we're supporting those families. And certainly between now and next year, we've got 10 families who are due to arrive. And the majority have come from Lebanon. So they're people who are struggling within the current conflict zone. So that's the resettlement scheme. Similarly, we're funded, we support people on the resettlement schemes for 5 years on those schemes, and it's the same amount of money, £20,520 per person, that we're funded from the Home Office. Again, they're fully funded by the Home Office, and we provide the wraparound support, and it brings additional benefits into the city. The other main cohort that we have are asylum seekers. So these are people who've made their own way to the UK. So the other schemes, the Home Office works with the UNHCR and the IOM, and they nominate particularly vulnerable people that they're concerned around from who are at risk from the Taliban or from other areas of the country. However, asylum seekers make their own way to the UK, and they claim asylum when they're in the country. And in Bristol, we have 380 bed spaces for asylum seekers, and we have around about 1,200 bed spaces in hotels for asylum seekers. Again, the asylum seekers have very specific legislation, so they're excluded from the Children Act. The local authority doesn't have any responsibility for asylum seekers' children. The Home Office has 100% responsibility for asylum seekers in terms of accommodation and subsistence. However, the children need education and a variety of other things, so it does impact on us as a city. And we receive asylum dispersal funding for asylum seekers. There's an asylum seeker account on the 31st of March every year, and we receive £750 for each asylum seeker that's in a bed space in Bristol at that time of the year. And then we also receive grants through the year for additional bed spaces that are created in the community. It's rather complex. But we in that we use to support asylum seekers in the city. So the Red Cross supports asylum seekers who are living in dispersed accommodation, and sort of people who've newly received status and living in homeless accommodation. We also support Bristol Refugee Rights for information, advice and guidance, Bristol Mind and Borderlands, who provide a sort of schedule of activities throughout the aid box community for people, to provide clothing for people. Recently we've had 150 single men who've arrived with one set of clothing, some without even shoes, they're in slippers. So we've been providing them with accommodation as well, with clothing. So that's the cohort of asylum seekers. And then the other main area of people who we work with in the No Recourse to Public Funds team. And they are funded from the General Fund. This is a long-standing team, and it's for a small cohort of people who are in the city who have no recourse to public funds. If they have children, we do have responsibilities under the Section 17, and if they have care needs, we have responsibilities as well. So the team work with a number of families, around about 100 households, providing subsistence and accommodation and assisting them to be supported to gain status, or if appeals right exhausted, to return. The vast majority of people in the No Recourse to Public Funds team come from safe countries. They've just been here, they might have had children here and had an instance such as domestic abuse where they can no longer provide for themselves because they've separated from the wage earner or from the person with status. That's a whistle-top tour through the asylum seeker services. So that's the information part of the report. And then there is a decision-making part of the report, which is to we're asking to delegate. Oh no, of course, the Homes for Ukraine team. Beg your pardon, how could I forget that? So the Homes for Ukraine team. So this was following the invasion of Ukraine. In March 2022, the government announced a new scheme where it's similar to community sponsorship in Canada, where people could open their homes to Ukrainians. So people would say, yes, I've got a room, I can support a Ukrainian for 6 months or more in my own home, and they apply for visas. The responsibility comes to the local authority when people arrive in the country, so we don't do any of the visas or who in Ukraine is chosen, we don't have a role in that. But when we've got boots on the ground in Bristol, we have specific duties to visit the families, to do safeguarding checks, to do CRB, to do DBS checks on family members in the houses that people are coming into. and to also support those families, providing, helping people to get into school. And our main role really is preventing now, because we're sort of 2.5 years on from the invasion. Now we're really supporting people to find their own accommodation. So the main part of our work is, again, as we do with resettlement, working with private rented sector landlords, encouraging them to have the confidence to support Ukrainians, people who don't have. It's quite difficult to be competitive in a very competitive private rented sector market in Bristol, because you don't have a landlord. You don't have a landlord reference, you don't have previous history, people are a little bit worried about whether they can rent to you and things like that. So the work of our team, we've got housing officers, is to reassure landlords that people have the right to be here, and to support landlords with small repairs, and to provide some sort, and help people with funding for deposits and things. And that one's funded from the Ministry for Housing, I always get this the wrong way around, Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. It used to be DLUC, now it's MHCLG. And we receive around about £10,000 per person for arriving in the country. So in terms of decisions, when we were under the Adult Care Committee, we've got delegated responsibility for the finances around Homes for Ukraine, and that goes through to March 2027. And we also have had a decision that we can support, or we can provide, we can invite or support 30 resettled families a year, up to 30 resettled families a year under the UK resettlement scheme and the Afghan resettlement scheme. And the decision we're coming to you today for is that we could have delegated responsibility to spend the budgets for the resettlement team. So we've got so Homes for Ukraine is all dealt with, but we've got around about £7 million, which we will have as an income. So if we resettle 30 families a year until March 2027, it'll be around about 4 people per family, which will bring in an income £20,000 per person plus. So that's what we're asking for: delegated powers to Christine and Hannah to take decisions on that spend. So rather than coming back to committee with its quarterly cycle, we can go up through internal decision making process. It's still all checked. We still have to ask for permission and come up with our ideas, and they all have to be solidly costed. So yes, that's for the external funding, not for general fund. That's for the external funding for the resettlement schemes. Is that all right? Was that a bit of a jumble, hopefully?
Oh, that was great. Thank you very much. So I'm looking at colleagues to see if there are any questions. Shona's got her hand up. If you go ahead, and then Sarah next. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this. I think as you were talking, it reminded me obviously of the riots we had over the summer, where particularly the Mercure Hotel was targeted, which obviously houses, from my understanding, a lot of asylum seekers. So, and I was wondering, how long are families stuck in those hotels? And you were talking about trying to get private sector landlords on board. How much success are we having with that? Because we know that, as you say, is maybe not as doesn't feel as financially stable to take on a refugee family or a family new in the country. So are we sort of at the whims of the market there? How much success have we had?
So, yeah, that was a terrible evening, and our team were actually in the hotel supporting the clients on that night. So we do stand alongside each other as colleagues. So asylum seekers are the responsibility of the Home Office, and they don't have the right to rent, and they don't have the right to public funds whilst they're asylum seekers. They do have the right to free healthcare. So they in the hotels, they're waiting for a decision on their status, and when they're given that decision, they have to leave the hotel within 28 days and seek alternative accommodation. So we don't. Our housing team support them through that. So people with children will come out of the hotel and go to the homeless team and say, I've never been able to work before in this country. I've never been able to rent before in this country. I've never been able to earn any money for myself. I'm not in a position to find anything now, but if you support me, then we will do our best to find accommodation, and that's the role of the Red Cross. So they kind of zoom in and help people at that stage that they're helping people. So our team isn't involved in that. And some of the refugees come with, some of the people who have refugee status come with English and high skills, and some people don't, and they've got quite a long journey before they're ready for work. So yeah, I'm afraid with asylum seekers it is difficult. So the government had a policy whereby in June last year through to December, they fast-tracked an awful lot of decisions. So nationally, around about 80,000 people were given decisions and had to leave asylum accommodation. But at the moment, we're back to... I'm the kind of single point of contact, so for the data, so I see how many people leave the accommodation. So at the moment, it's round about 40, 50 decisions a fortnight. People getting decisions, the vast majority are positive decisions. And also there's a churn. So the Home Office move people between the accommodations. So around about 80 new people arrive every fortnight and 80 people leave, but they might go to other places in the country. So hotels are not the place for people to live, and the government is all governments have wanted to bring down. So if there are properties in the community in other parts of the country, the families will move there. So far, a lot of our families go to Wales to accommodation, private rented sector accommodation in Wales as asylum seekers, so then they can cook for themselves and receive the subsistence funding. So I don't know how long people stay, but the aim was always a decision in 6 months. I don't know whether they've kept to that, because I can't tell I don't know when people have arrived in the country. Sometimes they've come to us from somewhere else, sometimes they're newly arrived.
Yeah, and that's something for the national government, isn't it? My second question was about what mental health support is available for asylum seekers, because we know that many of them have gone through very traumatic journeys to get here, whether that's in the back of a lorry or in a tiny boat. And so what, aside from obviously the general go to the GP, get antidepressants, is there any mental health support we can give specifically to this group of people?
So most support is provided through primary care. So there's a primary care service called The Haven, which is for refugees, asylum seekers and trafficked people. And they have their own psychologist and everything, and they do really, really well in primary care. So most people are supported through primary care, certainly in terms of resettlement and Homes for Ukraine. But there is a pathway for acute mental health needs, and we have a mental health pathway. AWP, Avon and Wiltshire Mental Health Partnership, have got a commission service called the Hope Service, and they provide services for people with post-traumatic stress, and then for people with other conditions, say if they have psychosis or bipolar or something like that, they would just go into generic acute mental health services. But our pathway is quite good. And then for children, we've got the ARC service as well. So there is a specific refugee and asylum seeker service for children, which is prioritised for asylum seeking children rather than resettled children. So actually in Bristol, we do pretty well, and they meet every fortnight, and they're constantly, it's a really reflective practice, and engaging with clients and learning and what do we need, and in really good relationship with health commissioners around what's needed and when do we need more and things like that. It's quite good, we're not bad. There's always room for improvement, but Bristol's not bad.
Councillor Classic?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, this is sort of one of those areas where there's obviously quite often a disconnect between, or, perceived disconnect between like local politics and national politics, but this even encompasses kind of international politics all the way trickling down into a local sort of politics. With that in mind, are we expecting to see any changes in the level of service, the level of people coming through the service, or the pressures on the service in the next few years, given the sort of global events that's happening, changes in politics throughout the country and kind of globally, I guess?
Yes, I think is the answer. We were contacted this week about a specific cohort who didn't in the end come to Bristol, but we are contacted. Bristol is known as a city that provides really good wraparound care, and we're quite responsive as well. So yes, I think there probably will be. So I do think this current government is rethinking. So the resettlement programs were set up by the previous government, and this government is rethinking, I think, what it's doing and its approach on different issues. Some new information came out about Homes for Ukraine this week. Rather than having hosts, they'd like them to be turned into lodging arrangements. It's not we do that already in Bristol. It's not a problem for us. But I think it is changing all the time, and the wars change. I noticed quite a few of our cohort this time through the UK resettlement scheme are Sudanese, because of the issues that have been going on in Sudan. So it does play out locally what's happening internationally.
Susan, did you?
I kind of got two questions, really. When we were sort of talking about national government funding coming down and looking at wraparound care and everything, does that include services like ESOL and training and courses that are going on all across communities? In South Bristol, in Hartcliffe-Wheelerwood, we don't seem to have a lot of availability of ESOL courses. And I don't know if that is an impact on placing of refugees and making it sort of evenly spread across the city, or are we kind of keeping accommodation in any particular areas? How is it kind of spread across the city in terms of allowing all communities to be actually involved and to see what is going on with regards to refugees, and educating people in the communities about refugees, as well as providing, the correct sort of like resources within a particular community for anybody coming into that community as well?
Okay. So in terms of ESOL, you've got accredited and unaccredited ESOL. So our team fund the community education team in Bristol City Council, and they provide community ESOL because they have a creche. So it's like a creche and community ESOL. And people can roll in and roll off. So when you're newly arrived, you can sort of come in at any time and access ESOL. And they've also got the conversation classes, and they're across the city. So that's one part of ESOL. And then City of Bristol College provide the accredited ESOL. They're the main provider. And they have about 1,000 places, 1,000 on the waiting list, and we've got 1,000 people who aren't even on the waiting list. So it's massively underfunded, and that is something that's funded by central government. It comes through WECA. So we've our team have funded a worker who's been specifically working for 2 years with WECA and the college to try and create more places. So we're always working on improving ESOL. But in the meantime, we fill that gap internally with the classes through community education, but there isn't enough. And then there's more classes so through the Ukrainians, we set up 12 Ukrainian hubs, and they were just. When you're living in somebody else's house trying to speak English all the time, you never relax because your brain's always working. So we asked local hubs to create Ukrainian spaces so that people could just relax, not be on their best behaviour all the time when they're with the hosts. And these have just morphed into their own thing. And some of them, like the Knoll one, not Knoll one, the Hartcliffe one, that one runs itself. So the women run it for themselves now. So they're all over the city, and English classes run out of there, and sometimes they find a teacher and they're like, Anne, can you fund the teacher? And it's like, yeah, of course. So it's quite iterative and collaborative, and we're really community based, and if people have got good ideas, we want to listen. And on the mental health, we funded some work, so we've been doing some like parental groups around trauma and just understanding the impact of trauma on you and your children. And then we've got like a grant fund. So if parents have got ideas as to what they want, how they feel, once they understand what's going on with themselves and their children, and then they can say, actually, this is what we want. And then we can commission that. So we're quite collaborative. In terms of housing, where it is, certainly for us in resettlement, it's across the city, so private landlords will approach us. Our families, the Afghan families, they really like the light and the space that there are in some of the houses, like in Stockwood and Hartcliffe's got, it's good. And Southmead, they're really well proportioned houses that work really well for families. So people really like that. Other families, like sort of Easton, where you can get like your continental foods on your doorstep and things. But Bristol's not big, so people can get anywhere that they want to go. So certainly I cannot say resettlement is across the whole city. And Ukraine is, again, across the whole city. So I think when there was funding for schools, there was DFE funding last year. And I think it was 35 schools that received funding. Yes, so for each resettled child, a school will get £4,500 per child to help them with some of the initial costs. So the funding does spread out and the learning does spread out. And our support workers work with people across the city. And as I say, there's the community's response that comes out. And sometimes it's there already. I know that in Hartcliffe, there's local residents that come out to meet people. But we've had neighbours coming out and meeting people, wanting to know, who are you and what's going on. And so, we do have people across the whole city,
Okay, yeah. Anybody else got any questions or comments they wish to ask? Okay, I'm going to pick up on what you were saying, Susan, about second language. And in schools and in kind of ALPs and post-16, post-18 provision, I do feel that there is a gap. I'm being told that there is a gap from those providers. And it is something that we're beginning to have conversations about. So I want to sort of make it clear that it's something that we're aware of, that there is a need within the city, whether that's capacity building or skills development amongst our existing staff. Of course, that will need investment in order for that to happen, or whether it's another service. I don't know what that might be yet, but it is something that we're aware of is needed, and that there is a gap for that. So you're not the only kind of provider, if you like, that's saying we need some sort of second language support here for some of our learners. It's coming from other areas as well, other providers across the city as well. Okay, thanks. Once a child is on roll with a school, there's the initial kind of settling in. But when the school does their census, that child is just a child like anybody will get funded. That place will get funded like in the way that they normally do the following year. So it will come then through the DFE because that child's on roll with the school. So that there's no kind of additional pull, if you like, on the resource that's already coming into the city. That comes in through the DSG in the normal way as every other child would. Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Sorry. It might be really weird, but one of the things I've actually picked up on when I'm working with people who have had ESOL is actually the working with topics like maths, because of the way that they're taught maths in different countries. So it's not just about like language barriers. Sometimes academically they have an awareness, but it's little things that don't get picked up on through ESOL, where the language barrier isn't just about the English side of things, but also about the way that maths, because you think maths is like worldwide, I mean 1 + 1 is 2 no matter where you are in the world, but actually when it comes down to the technicalities of mathematics, there is that issue of how things are presented, how things are laid out and stuff like that. So it's kind of like looking at the whole picture rather than just like the language barrier as well. So
yeah, no, I completely agree. And ESOL services are quite wide in that sense, and there is a recognition within them that the bilingual child needs to be developing both languages along at the same time, and they will be doing that in their home setting, but they'll also then need that English understanding as well. And the value of children that are by the value of having more than one language and having a skill that enables you to speak more than one language it's something that is not particularly within the kind of British education or the British education psyche, because we have what is considered a dominant English across the world, and kind of, it's the world of flying, and pilots communicate through this language and things like that. And so in many ways, those children that are bilingual, those skills are immensely important for them, and they bring immense kind of different ways of thinking and different ways of engaging. And the languages in Britain, they're not well developed. We don't see ourselves as being a nation that learns language in the way even our European neighbours do, really.
No, I think, so we've had befriending schemes, so every new family that arrives for resettlement has had befrienders, and certainly during COVID, then they became homework, and we used to have homework clubs as well, one in North Bristol and one in South Bristol, and a lot of that was when you get given homework, it's like understanding what you've just been asked, because it's sort of written up, or you might have it written in your book or given it on a slip of paper, and then it's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this homework. So we had teachers who volunteered, or people who used to be teachers who volunteered to help us with with homework, and as you say, that half your marks in maths come from your workings out, not just the final answer, and just explaining or just taking the time to explain all of that. And some schools do really, really well around filling in those gaps, and other schools, they just don't have the numbers of kids, so they're all new. But we've got more collaborative cross-learning and things. So yeah, all on a journey.
I just want to make a point here. When you're looking at integrating people into a community, food, it works. It absolutely works. I mean, we get, when I'm working with my young people, getting them to try different foods from different places, goes down a storm. Food. Have a food festival.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We funded Redcliffe Hub in the riots. They were attracted to the Redcliffe Hotel because the Redcliffe Hotel was published in the local papers a year before, and so subsequent to the publishing, and the local people, we didn't know anything about this. Then it was funded that Redcliffe, the local people were funded, and they do lots of luncheon clubs and really all that collaborative. We've got another one in round the back of another hotel as well, where there's 2 days a week of sort of luncheon shared cook up. And as you say, with young people, we've been doing that. So yeah, we do work on it.
Okay, thank you. So committee, there are 3 areas that we are being asked to note. This is a key decision because it's above $500,000 and it's citywide impact. So the first one is that we note the information about the Bristol Sanctuary Services. The second one is that we note the progress updates rather, relating to the strategy that takes us from 2025 to 2030. And the third one is that we authorise the Executive Director of Children and Education, in consultation with the Chair of the CYP Committee and Section 151 Officer, who is the Finance Officer. That's correct, isn't it? I'm looking at Jo, she's going yes. So Finance Director, to take all the steps required to accept and spend the sanctuary scheme specific grants, including those over $500,000. From central government until March 2027, as outlined in the report. So I'm looking to see, I think, do we need to vote?
You need to have a seconder to...
Okay, right, so I need a seconder for number 3.
So you move the report and then you need somebody to second it for you.
Okay, and it's because what this is saying is, we as a committee, Hannah, myself, and the finance lead, the Section 151 officer, because the money's coming down from the Home Office, that we'll accept it and then agree to put the contracts out and spend it. It's going to be large amounts of money, and that's why it's... okay, do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we vote? Yeah, okay, so we need, so those in favour of that, of 1, 2 and 3, we put our hands up if we're in favour of doing that. Okay, so that's unanimous. What I'm really conscious of is how frequently we might want some update around this service. I'm going to suggest annually, And I'm also going to look at to see, are there points in the year that would be more appropriate, or is this is it kind of rolling?
It rolls. It rolls all year.
Yeah.
So when we had sort of 30 people, so the decision to accept 30 households a year came from September, and I'm like, oh, so is that September to September reporting? But we just decided, no, we'll just go with the financial year. So we'll aim for 30 families from April to March and just stick with the municipal year that everything else rolls with. So probably maybe April or May, maybe. But there isn't a particular time in the year where we do anything interesting. No.
Right. You do interesting things all year round.
I was going to say, you mentioned a point in the year where everybody gets counted.
Oh yeah. So that's the 31st of March. So we could, after that maybe, and then we'll report on that.
Okay, so shall I suggest that we request an update? The first committee that we hold, and I haven't got those dates at the top of my head, after March the 31st.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let me put that as get an update on what's going on. Okay. Thank you very much. And that's the end of that agenda item. So please feel free to vacate the room. And that, I think we're now on to this is our final agenda item, isn't it? So this is number 13. This is Keeping Bristol Safe Partnership, the annual report for 23-24, and the plan for the updated arrangements under Working Together 2023. And this is for Carrie Yates is going to, as the head of service, is going to introduce the paper for us. Over to yourself. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So I'm here to talk to you about the Keeping Bristol Safe Partnership annual report, and then also the new arrangements around the partnership that we've got planned for next year. So firstly, the annual report, which covers April 23 to March 24, and includes oversight of our Keeping Children Safe group, our Safeguarding Adults group, and Safeguarding Communities group, and has been shared with the DFE under requirements set out in Working Together 2023. As this is the Children and Young People's Policy Committee, I've pulled out some key highlights that I'll go through from the report, particularly focusing on the Keeping Children Safe group, and then at the end, obviously, I can take any questions. So some highlights from across the year. A particularly positive piece of news was the launch of our multi-agency safeguarding hub. So you'll hear the words MASH a lot, and that enables the sharing of information between our multi-agency partners so that risks can be shared at the earliest opportunity, and we can do some joint kind of assessment of that together. Another real positive across the year was Operation Encompass, which was specifically focused at improving information sharing between the police and schools around domestic abuse, so that schools get really early, quick recognition where there's been a domestic abuse incident in household. We also launched our child sexual abuse pathway and associated resources, and the aim of that is to increase confidence and skills around working with children where there may be a risk of sexual abuse. And that work's kind of continuing, but we're really proud of the work that's happened in terms of getting the pathway out there and starting to build confidence around that and people using the tools associated. I also think it's really important to flag the shadow board and the contribution that group of young people have made to a number of projects, including the University of Bristol's survey on vaping and the new domestic abuse strategy. And they've also been part of interview panels for several senior positions, including Hannah's position, and made a really positive contribution to that. So our focus for the next year is really growing our developments around understanding lived experience for our children and young people, and ensuring youth voice is really central to all our plans. Oversight of the child safeguarding practice reviews, which are underway, and implementing any learning with partners, and that links back to the item we talked around earlier about serious youth violence. So we'll be really working closely across the partnership to make sure that any recommendations are implemented. And then, as I'll talk about in a bit more detail, implementing the changes required through Working Together 2023. The other bit that's probably important to note is we're already planning our report for next year. So obviously we're already quite a way into the year in terms of reporting. So we really want to have a focus in the next annual report on impact and showing the impact of the work that's happening. So we're already kind of starting planning around that. Okay, so next I'm going to take you through the changes to our Keeping Bristol Safe partnership following working together to safeguard children coming in 2023, the updates. So working together provides the statutory guidance outlining what organisations must do to help protect and promote the welfare of all children. It's the key guidance, and it's been updated to promote delivery of the government strategy Stable Homes Built on Love, which outlines the government's commitment to support every child to grow up in a safe, stable and loving home. So there's a really strong focus in working together to safeguard children to strengthen multi-agency safeguarding arrangements and information sharing, and a lot of that is informed by previous child practice safeguarding reviews, not thankfully in Bristol, but it is a theme over a number of years of information sharing being really key, and the need for us to be really strong at doing that. So the Keeping Bristol Safe Partnership's implementing changes to ensure we've got effective arrangements in place and that we're meeting the requirements that working together sets out. So one of those requirements is that chief executive officers of the local authority, health and police become the lead safeguarding partner for their agency. And then lead safeguarding partners should each appoint a delegated safeguarding partner to oversee the operational delivery. So to be compliant with Working Together 2023, our local children's multi-agency safeguarding arrangements must be chaired by a delegated safeguarding partner. And currently in Bristol, that isn't the arrangement we had in place. So the Keeping Bristol Safe Executive Board was chaired by an independent person, and our Keeping Children Safe Delivery Group has also been chaired by someone who's not a delegated safeguarding partner. So we're therefore making changes to ensure that we're going to be compliant with Working Together 2023. So the executive have agreed on new arrangements, and at the moment those the changes we're making, so we currently have 3 delivery groups and the executive, so currently known as Keeping Children Safe, Keeping Adults Safe and Keeping Community Safe. And these will be revised to become the Children's Multi-Agency Safeguarding Arrangements, the Safeguarding Adults Board and the Community Safety Partnership. The multi-agency safeguarding arrangements will be chaired by a delegated safeguarding partner, so that's going to be Hannah, who you'll know is the Executive Director of Children's Services, and then that will meet our requirements in line with Working Together 2023. Our plan is for the executive to remain in place for the time being as a strategic oversight board and to enable a joined up approach to the protection of communities, vulnerable children and adults, and hopefully, so I can't remember who asked the question before about is there the risk of any gaps, and actually that's a really key part of making sure there isn't. And we'll review the revised arrangements during 2025 to make sure they're effective and doing what we need them to do. Under Working Together, we need to publish our new arrangements by the end of December, and we need to update our constitution. Our plan is to bring the full arrangements with all the detail to Committee for Information in January 2025. And another important thing to note is that the elected chair of this group will be invited to the relevant board, so that will be the Keeping Children Safe Board, and will meet regularly with the chair to maintain oversight of the effectiveness of our arrangements. Any questions on either the annual report or the updated arrangements?
So I'm looking at my committee members, see if anyone's got any questions around that. Okay, I do have a question. My understanding is that education becomes a kind of lead partner in the way that health and police have been.
So
is that correct?
So Working Together stops short of making education a lead partner, but it does put a very strong emphasis on them being part of the delivery. So unfortunately, I would say they haven't been given that statutory role. but there is a clear emphasis around that. So we're doing lots of work already. So we have education representation on the Keeping Children Safe board, and as part of a lot of the subgroups of doing the kind of actual work from that board. We're also in the process of setting up a education reference group, because I think historically, and Hannah, you might want to say something about this too, I think historically we're really good at working with the officers of the local authority. Sorry, it gets a bit more challenging when you're trying to get the message out to schools. So we really want to make sure that not only are we working with officers in the local authority, but that schools are really engaged with that work too. So we're really considering how we engage members from those schools, and not always the same members, to get messages from the Keeping Bristol Safe partnership out there.
Did you want to say anything? Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a theme, and it's interesting because it's run all the way through today, the involvement in education. Schools with serious youth violence links back to it's sort of attendance, inclusion, exclusion. It was a theme when we talked about youth justice. It's a theme when we talk about safeguarding. And so, we need to do it legally, but there's a good reason we need to do it. So, yes, we have, and it's worth saying the schools and the trusts really, really keen to work with us. So there's an opportunity in this, particularly, obviously around the sort of education and safeguarding group, it's sort of representation, we need to get all that right. They're very interested in particularly conversations around how schools can work with us, particularly on safeguarding extra-familial harm, some of this work we talked about earlier on, and leading some of that work across Bristol. And we're keen for them to lead some of that work, play a bit of a leadership role, because I think that has been the gap between us to date in our strategy conversations. So, yeah.
And I think there's some really positive work around that, and not just in the education reference group, which will be brilliant, but also in wider. So we're doing work around preparation for joint targeted area inspection, which is an inspection run by Ofsted and all the other regulatory bodies, so CQC, Probation Inspectorate, and the Inspectors for Police. And we have strong representation from education officers from within the local authority, but also a real commitment from school representatives to be part of that work, so that we can kind of filter those messages out there, and so that we're really linked up with what's happening in schools.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, there's a lot of safeguarding boards, it appears. And did you say there's a specific role for the person that operates as the political lead for child safeguarding?
Yeah, so you will be invited to all the Keeping Children Safe board meetings. There's not necessarily an expectation that you'd be able to do all of them, but you'll be invited, you'll get all the papers. And then obviously, Hannah, as the chair of the board, you'll have regular meetings so that you can kind of keep oversight of what's happening in any decision making there.
Yeah, okay. And I suppose the way in which the children, the adults and the communities interact is going to be really key.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why we're keeping that executive over the top, which actually isn't necessarily a requirement for us to do, but we feel that's really important to kind of get the join up. But also there's a big piece of work going on, which have kind of started already, about us mapping out what every subgroup under each board does, how they link across, how they report across to each other, how they report up and down. So that's a piece of work that's happening at the moment to partly see if we can streamline, because we don't want to be duplicating work, but also definitely to make sure there aren't any gaps, and that we're communicating with each other and not doing something over here which is sort of similar to this over here, but not kind of linked up. So yeah, there's a big piece of work at the moment, lots of mapping going on to make sure that we've got that really, really tight. And part of the review that we've kind of already built into doing in 2025 will be, are we getting this right as we're going along, rather than just sort of coming up with a plan and then ploughing ahead with it.
Okay, thank you. Susan? No, go on.
In terms of the community stuff, as councillors, if we have a particular concern or a question or anything like that within our own communities or across Bristol generally, who would we then kind of relay that back to in terms of speaking to the appropriate people?
So we've got a business unit that supports all three boards and the executive, so we can make sure you've got the contact details so that you can email in any concerns, and then we can make sure someone gets back to you and it's kind of steered to the appropriate place.
Okay.
Okay, so if there's no further comments or questions, I'm going to take us through what this item is required. Oh, it's noting. Okay, so we are noting the annual report, and we're also noting the revised guidance arrangements for working together to safeguard children. This is a non-key decision. We're happy to note. Yes, got lots of nods. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the input there, Carrie. So that is the end of our agenda. Katja, have you got something, an AOB that you wish to raise with us?
Sorry, I was just wondering whether we were going to say yes to the finishing task group or the working group for, it was on the original agenda, but it doesn't seem to be on this one.
Yeah, I was coming to that. Joe, have you got a comment on that? Because we are wanting to push it forward, aren't we?
Well, so we need to bring a report to your a proper report to your January meeting, and we'll have to do some scoping out, bring a scope for the group. So we need to do some work between now and your January meeting, which is the 23rd, is it, of January? Okay. So we'll need to do some work with officers and scope that out, and there's just a little bit of, we need to go through a process of putting it on a forward plan to show that you're bringing a report here to agree that, but that doesn't mean to say that we can't start, you know, doing a little bit of work between now and January anyway, if you wanted to. So we just need to do a little bit of formality at your January meeting to say that you're doing that piece of work, but we can start meeting and talking to officers in the meantime and get it moving if that's what people want to do.
Yeah, definitely.
So Katja's going to lead on that. Anybody else that's wished to be involved in those early stages, please indicate when the communication comes out. I'm sure we would be very welcome about that. Thank you very much. Okay.
Just to say very quickly, it would be very helpful. I know that we have one party group whip here, but if you wanted to indicate in ahead of time to your party group whips whether or not you did or didn't want to be part of that group, it would be really useful to get that moving, because that's sometimes what holds it up, is knowing who's going to be part of that group. So if you...
In terms of a task and finish group, our World of Conservative Party obviously want a representative there, but it'd be a bit dependent on what format the meetings are taking place and the time, just because of the workload we have in our small numbers.
Yeah, noted. Thank you. Yeah, we'll be mindful of that.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. We'll communicate with you about that.
Okay, thank you. And so all I have to say then is thank you very much for your time and attention to officers and to committee members and members of the public that were in earlier on for forum. Our next official meeting is on Thursday, the 23rd of January at 5 o'clock. Good night, everybody. Thank you very much.